The day had stretched long and weary for Lucy, a woman whose poised elegance seemed to radiate from her very being. She stepped out of the bustling Starbucks on a busy city street, the aroma of roasted coffee still clinging to her crisp white dress. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement, a rhythm that matched the fleeting sense of peace she'd found during a brief catch-up with friends inside. The late afternoon sun cast golden streaks across the sidewalk, and for a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to exhale, letting the tension of the day slip away. But that fragile calm splintered like glass when two figures in uniform cut through the crowd toward her. "Ma'am, stop right there," came the barked command, sharp as a blade. It was Mark, the older of the two police officers, his voice slicing through the hum of the street. His eyes, cold and unyielding, locked onto her with an intensity that made her stomach twist. Behind him stood Ethan, his younger partner, shifting uneasily on his feet. His gaze flickered nervously between Mark and Lucy, his youthful face betraying a discomfort he couldn't quite mask. Lucy turned to face them, her heart giving a quick, unsteady thud. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice steady, but laced with a quiet strength as she tightened her grip on her handbag, its leather cool against her palm. Mark crossed his arms, his broad frame looming larger as he stepped closer. "We've had reports of a theft nearby," he said, his tone flat but edged with accusation. "You fit the description of the suspect." The words hit her like a slap. Lucy blinked, her mind racing to process the absurdity of it. "Excuse me," she said, her voice rising slightly despite her effort to keep it even. "I was just inside Starbucks. I don't know anything about a theft." Her brows furrowed, indignation sparking in her chest as she stood her ground, the weight of his stare pressing against her. Mark's lips twisted into a sneer, his expression dripping with contempt. "You expect us to just take your word for it?" He shot back. "Hand over your bag." Now, his demand hung heavy in the air, a challenge wrapped in authority. Her jaw tightened, a flush of anger creeping up her neck. "On what grounds?" she countered, her words clipped but firm. "I haven't done anything wrong." She could feel the eyes of passers-by beginning to linger, a ripple of curiosity stirring among the crowd. Mark leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "You look like someone with something to hide," he said, his breath brushing against her ear. "Refusing only makes you look guiltier." His words were a taunt, daring her to defy him. A murmur rustled through the growing cluster of onlookers. A middle-aged man in a faded jacket nudged his companion, his voice carrying just enough for Lucy to catch. "What's going on here?" he muttered. His friend, a weary woman with a pinched face, smirked. "Probably one of those rich types," she said loudly, her tone thick with disdain. "Thinks she's above the law." Lucy's cheeks burned, a mix of fury and shame flooding through her. She whipped her head back to Mark, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. "I don't care how I look to you or anyone else here," she said, her eyes blazing. "You can't stop me and throw accusations around without evidence." Mark's grin widened, a predator savoring the fight. "Let me make this clear," he said, his tone icy. "You don't get to refuse." His hand hovered near her bag, his intent unmistakable. Lucy took a step back, clutching her handbag tighter, her knuckles whitening. "I know my rights," she said, her voice rising with conviction. "If you think I've done something, take me to the station and file a report. But I won't stand here and let you harass me in front of everyone." Ethan shifted, his boots scuffing the pavement. His face tightened with unease, and he murmured, "Mark, maybe we should stay out of this." His words were tentative, a plea swallowed by the tension. Mark didn't bother glancing at him. "Don't touch me," Lucy snapped as Mark's hand darted toward her bag, his fingers brushing the strap. She jerked back, her pulse hammering in her ears. The crowd swelled, their whispers growing sharper, more pointed. Was she resisting if she's innocent? Someone questioned, feeding the spectacle. Mark's expression hardened, his patience fraying. "Cooperate, or I'll have to take this further," he warned, his voice a low rumble. Lucy met his gaze, her defiance a steel thread running through her fear. "I won't let you intimidate me," she said. "Do your job properly, or leave me alone." The standoff stretched taut, the air crackling with anticipation. Ethan's fingers twitched at his sides, his conflict palpable. But the weight of Mark's authority kept him silent. The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the unfolding drama. Then, a woman's voice cut through the hazinancy. A bystander with graying hair and a fierce glint in her eye. She stepped forward, her hands balled into fists. "Officer, isn't this a bit much?" she demanded. "She's clearly cooperating, and you're treating her like a criminal." Mark's head snapped toward her, his glare venomous. "Mind your own business, Mum," he spat, "unless you want to be part of this too." Nancy flinched but didn't back down, her voice trembling with resolve. "This isn't right. You're abusing your power." Mark ignored her, his focus zeroing back on Lucy. "Last chance," he said, his hand inching toward her bag again. "Hand it over." "No," Lucy said, her refusal a quiet thunderclap. Ethan took a hesitant step forward, his voice barely audible. "Mark, maybe we should de-escalate. This doesn't feel right." Mark's eyes flashed, a storm brewing in their depths. "Are you questioning me?" he snarled. Ethan froze, his courage crumbling under the weight of that glare. The tension coiled tighter as Mark's hand hovered near Lucy's bag, his intent clear. She braced herself, her heart pounding so fiercely she thought it might burst. She wouldn't yield, no matter how far he pushed. Mark's face twisted with a cold, calculated fury, her resistance stoking his need to dominate. "Why are you here, miss?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. "Suspiciously close to a crime scene, aren't you? Got something to hide?" "I told you," Lucy shot back, her words sharp as glass. "I came from Starbucks. There's nothing to hide." Mark smirked, a cruel edge curling his lips. "If you're innocent, you wouldn't mind proving it." Before she could respond, he lunged, snatching her handbag from her grasp. Lucy gasped, her hands flying forward to reclaim it. But Mark shoved her back with a casual brutality that sent her stumbling. He tore the bag open, rifling through its contents with deliberate malice. Her wallet, makeup, fonial of it tumbled onto the pavement, scattered like debris in the wake of his rage. "You can't do this," Lucy cried, her voice quaking with outrage. "This is harassment." Mark held up the empty bag, his movements exaggerated, theatrical. "Well, nothing here," he said, his tone mocking. "But criminals are crafty." He dropped the bag to the ground and crossed his arms, his eyes glinting with menace. "Maybe you're hiding something elsewhere." Lucy's breath hitched, her hands instinctively clutching the hem of her dress. "Don't you dare," she hissed, stepping back, her body tensing for a fight. "I'll decide what's necessary," Mark said, his voice cold as a winter wind. In a sudden, shocking move, he crouched and grabbed at the hem of her dress, his fingers brushing against the fabric as he yanked it upward, exposing her legs to the crowd. Lucy screamed, a raw, piercing sound that echoed down the street. "Get off me," she shouted, slapping his hand away with all the strength she could muster, her nails raking against his skin. She kicked out, her foot connecting with his shin, but Mark's grip was unrelenting, his strength overpowering her desperate struggle. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath rippling through the onlookers. Some stepped closer, their faces etched with shock and unease, yet no one moved to intervene. Nancy's voice rose again, shrill with desperation. "This is going too far," she yelled, surging forward as if to physically pull Mark away. "Leave her alone." Mark whirled to face her, his towering frame casting a shadow over her slight figure. "Step back, lady," he barked, "unless you want to be charged with obstruction." Nancy's bravery wavered, her fists unclenching as she faltered under his glare. "You can't treat people like this," she said, her voice softening into a plea. "I treat them however I need to," Mark snapped, turning back to Lucy with renewed focus. Her hands gripped her dress tightly, her knuckles white against the fabric. "You won't touch me," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. Mark sneered, his lips curling with disdain. "We'll see about that." He reached for her dress again, his fingers closing around the fabric. Lucy fought back, twisting and thrashing, her arms flailing as she tried to break free. But his strength was a wall she couldn't breach. With a swift, brutal tug, he lifted the hem of her dress above her knees, exposing her to the gawking crowd. "No!" Lucy's scream shattered the air, a sound torn from the depths of her humiliation and fury. She clawed at his hands, her nails digging into his flesh, her legs kicking wildly to free herself. The crowd erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps and murmurs. Some turned away, their faces pinched with discomfort, unable to bear the sight. Others whispered among themselves, their voices sharp with judgment. "What kind of woman resists like that?" A man muttered, his tone thick with suspicion. His companion, a stout woman with a scarf pulled tight around her head, nodded. She must be hiding something. Nancy's eyes brimmed with tears as she scanned the bystanders, her voice breaking. "Why won't anyone stop him?" she pleaded, her words swallowed by the crowd's inertia. "Stay out of it," someone hissed back, their tone laced with fear. "You don't want trouble." Ethan stood frozen, his face drained of color, his hands trembling at his sides. "Mark, this isn't right," he said, his voice a fragile thread barely audible above the chaos. Mark's glare sliced through him, silencing him instantly. "You don't get to decide what's right," he growled. "Watch and learn." Lucy's strength waned against Mark's brute force. He shoved her back against the rough brick wall of a nearby building, pinning her there as he held her dress in his grip. The world shrank around her, the crowd's whispers a relentless assault, each word a needle piercing her skin. Tears stung her eyes, hot and bitter, but she clenched her jaw, refusing to let them fall. "This is illegal," she shouted, her throat raw. "You're violating my rights." Mark's face twisted with a sickening blend of satisfaction and scorn. "You think your rights matter when you look guilty," he taunted, his grip tightening. Finally, Ethan moved, his fists clenched as he stepped forward. "Mark, stop," he said, his voice louder now, edged with a shaky resolve. "This is going too far." Mark's head snapped around, his eyes locking onto Ethan's with a fury that rooted him in place. "Are you forgetting who's in charge here?" he roared. Ethan faltered, his step faltering as he retreated. "I just think," he began, but Mark cut him off. "Don't think," he snarled. "Do your job." Lucy's voice cracked as she yelled, her words a defiant cry against the injustice. "You're not above the law. I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done." Mark's laughter was a dark, hollow sound. "You against me," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Go ahead, sweetheart. No one's going to believe a word you say." A fresh wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Some faces softened with sympathy, their brows creasing with discomfort, but they remained at a safe distance, unwilling to cross the invisible line. Lucy's hands balled into fists, her body trembling with a volatile mix of rage and humiliation. Her voice dropped to a low, chilling calm, each word deliberate and weighted with promise. "You'll regret this." Mark released her dress with a flourish of mockery, letting it fall back into place as he stepped back, his arms crossing over his chest. "Good luck with that," he said, his smirk a final twist of the knife. Lucy sank to her knees, her breath ragged as she gathered her scattered belongings from the pavement, her wallet, her phone, her dignity strewn across the ground like wreckage. The crowd began to disperse, their curiosity sated, leaving her alone in the aftermath of Mark's tyranny. In that moment, the lesson burned into her soul. Justice was not a given, it was a battle. Mark's abuse of power had stripped her bare, not just of her privacy, but of her faith in a system meant to protect. Yet, as she rose, clutching her tattered resolve, she vowed to fight back. The consequences of unchecked authority rippled beyond her, a warning to all who witnessed it. For every Mark emboldened by power, there would be a Lucy, forged in the fire of injustice, ready to demand accountability. And in the shadows, Ethan's silence lingered, a quiet testament to the cost of complicity, a burden he'd carry long after the crowd faded away. Her hands trembled violently, yet there was a fierce intent in every movement as she cast a sharp, accusing glance at Ethan. He stood there, unable to meet her eyes, his head dipping slightly as if the weight of his own guilt pressed it down. His cheeks flushed with shame, a silent confession written in the way his shoulders slumped. Around them, the crowd that had gathered began to thin out, their murmurs fading into the late afternoon air. The thrill of the drama had fizzled, and with it, their interest. People shuffled away, kicking at loose gravel on the pavement, their footsteps a dull rhythm against the tension that still hung thickly. Between those who remained, Nancy lingered a moment longer, her face a storm of emotions. Grief carved deep lines around her mouth, while fury blazed in her dark eyes. She took a hesitant step toward Lucy, her lips parting as if the words she wanted to say were too heavy to lift. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking like fragile glass under pressure. The apology was raw, soaked in regret, and it trembled in the space between them. Lucy's response was a curt, tight knot, her lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line, sealing in a torrent of emotions she wasn't ready to release. Then, with a sharp turn, she marched off, her heels clicking against the concrete in quick, deliberate beats. Her posture was rigid, her shoulders squared against the humiliation and rage warring inside her, each step a declaration that she would not crumble. When Lucy reached her apartment, she flung the door open with such force that it crashed against the wall, the sound reverberating through the empty space like a gunshot. She slammed it shut behind her, the echo bouncing off the bare walls of her quiet sanctuary. For a moment, she stood motionless in the center of the room, her chest heaving as she clutched her handbag to her body. It was a lifeline, the leather creaking under her white-knuckled grip as if it alone could anchor her. Against the storm raging within, her gaze drifted to the hallway mirror, catching her reflection unawares. The sight stopped, her cold tears streaked down her face in uneven trails. Her dress hung askew, wrinkled and stained from the chaos of the day, and her eyes burned with a humiliation so visceral it seemed to pulse in the air around her. She barely recognized the woman staring back, her features twisted with a pain she couldn't outrun. The sudden buzz of her phone jolted her from the trance, the vibration rattling against the contents of her bag. With shaky hands, she fished it out, her breath catching as Helen's name flashed across the screen. She answered, and Helen's voice burst through instantly, thick with worry. "Lucy, are you okay?" The concern was palpable, wrapping around Lucy like a lifeline she desperately needed. No, Lucy stammered, her voice quivering as the words fought their way out. "It was horrible. I can't even." Her sentence shattered, replaced by a sob that clawed its way up her throat, raw and uncontrollable. "Start from the beginning," Helen urged, her tone steady yet insistent. "Tell me everything." Lucy's recounting came in jagged fragments, each sentence punctuated by a fresh wave of anger and shame. She painted the scene in vivid detail, Mark's smug arrogance as he wielded his authority like a weapon, the way the bystanders had watched with detached curiosity, their faces blank as they let the injustice unfold, and Ethan's deafening silence, his refusal to act twisting the knife deeper. Her voice grew louder, sharper, as she relived every excruciating moment, the humiliation seeping into her words like ink on damp paper. On the other end, Helen listened intently, her breathing audible through the line. When Lucy finished, Helen's tone hardened, edged with a righteous fury. "That man is a monster. He can't get away with this." Lucy sank onto her couch, the cushions swallowing her slight frame as she gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles whitening. "I feel so powerless," she admitted, her voice cracking under the weight of her despair. "No one helped me. They just stood there, staring like it was some kind of show." Helen's response was swift, cutting through the haze of Lucy's anguish. "That's what they want you to feel. If they can crush your spirit, they've already won. But you're stronger than this, Lucy. You are." Her words landed like a spark in dry grass, and though the fire in Lucy's chest still smoldered with rage, her breathing began to steady, a flicker of resolve taking root. "How do I fight back?" Lucy asked, her voice low but threaded with a growing determination. "He's a cop, Helen. People will believe him over me. They always do." She could almost see Helen shaking her head through the phone, her friend's conviction unwavering. "Not if you make them listen," Helen countered firmly. "I've been where you are. Years ago, my boss harassed me at work. He thought he could scare me into shutting up, that his position gave him the right to do whatever he wanted. But I fought back. It wasn't easy, Lucy. It was hell, but I didn't let him win." Lucy fell silent, her mind racing as Helen's story sank in. The weight of her friend's experience stirred something deep within her, a restless energy she hadn't felt before. "What happened?" she asked quietly, leaning forward as if the answer might change everything. "I reported him," Helen said, her voice steady with the pride of survival. "It didn't fix everything right away, but it started something. Others came forward after me, and eventually, he was fired. You have to start somewhere, Lucy. You can't let this slide." As Helen spoke, Memories flooded Lucy's mind. Moments she'd witnessed injustice and done nothing. She saw her colleague, timid and hunched, enduring a manager's cruel taunts while she'd stayed quiet, pretending not to hear. She remembered a friend on the subway, shrinking under a stranger's aggressive advances as Lucy averted her eyes, convincing herself it wasn't her fight. Each instance gnawed at her now, a parade of regrets she could no longer ignore. "I've stood by too many times," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if speaking the truth aloud might break her. "I can't keep pretending it's not my problem." "Not this time." Helen's tone softened, but her resolve held firm. "That's the spirit. It's not just about you, Lucy, it's about making sure he doesn't hurt anyone else." Lucy sat up straighter, a spark igniting in her chest, faint but undeniable. "What do I do? How do I even start?" she asked, her mind already racing with possibilities. "I know a group," Helen replied without missing a beat. "They're advocates for women's rights, and they've handled cases like this before. I'll send you their contact info." Lucy nodded, though Helen couldn't see her, the gesture more for herself than anyone else. "I'll call them," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Good," Helen replied, a hint of a smile breaking through her words. "And Lucy, you're not alone in this. No matter what happens, I'm right here with you." Tears welled up in Lucy's eyes again, but this time they carried a different weight, not just pain, but gratitude, a quiet hope. "Thank you, Helen," she murmured. "That means everything." After the call ended, Lucy took a deep, steadying breath and reached for her laptop. She opened it with purpose, the soft glow of the screen illuminating her determined expression. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before they began to move, hesitantly at first. Then with growing speed, she poured every detail she could recall into the document, a sneer curling Mark's lips as he loomed over her, Ethan's fleeting, guilt-ridden glances, the hushed whispers of the crowd as they watched her humiliation unfold. With each word, her fear ebbed, transforming into something sharper, more potent. She wasn't just a victim anymore. Ash was a voice, demanding to be heard. Her phone buzzed again, and a text from Helen appeared with a link to the advocacy group. Lucy clicked it, her eyes scanning their mission statement and the stories of others who'd fought back. Each sentence fueled her resolve, stoking the fire within her. "This isn't over," she whispered to herself, her voice low but fierce. "Not by a long shot." With Helen's unwavering support and a newfound determination burning in her core, Lucy prepared to take her first real step toward justice. She reached out to the organization, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number, but her heart steady with purpose. That night, she sat at her desk, the room dimly lit by the glow of her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, crafting a meticulous account of the incident. She described every word Mark had spat at her, every action he'd taken to assert his dominance, every humiliating moment that had seared itself into her memory. The precision of her writing was a weapon, each sentence a strike against the fear that still lingered. As she typed, she felt the last threads of helplessness unravel, replaced by a resolve that hardened with every keystroke. The next morning, she contacted the women's advocacy group Helen had recommended. Her voice wavered slightly as she explained her situation to a caseworker named Sarah, but it held firm enough to convey her determination. Sarah listened patiently, her calm demeanor a balm to Lucy's frayed nerves. "We've dealt with cases involving law enforcement misconduct before," Sarah assured her over the phone, her tone professional yet warm. "But it'll take strong evidence and witnesses. Are you ready to push this forward?" Lucy hesitated, her breath catching as the enormity of the task loomed before her. But then she nodded to herself, a silent vow. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady now. "I can't let him keep doing this." Later that afternoon, she stepped out of a bustling local cafe after her meeting with Sarah, her head spinning with the plan they'd laid out, collecting evidence, identifying potential witnesses, building a case that could withstand Mark's inevitable pushback. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, her movements automatic. The screen flashed with a blocked number, and the message that followed sent a chill racing down her spine. "You think you can win against me? Be careful what you wish for." She froze, her eyes darting around the busy street, searching for a face that didn't belong. The crowd moved past her, oblivious, but the unease clung to her like damp cloth. Shaking it off, she forwarded the text to Sarah, who promised to log it as evidence of intimidation. But Lucy knew Mark's connections in the police department made him feel untouchable. A predator cloaked in a badge. Meanwhile, across town, Mark prowled the streets on patrol, his uniform crisp and his demeanor predatory. His eyes locked onto Isabel, a young woman standing nervously at a bus stop, her fingers scrolling absently across her phone. She was oblivious to his approach, her earbuds drowning out the world as she waited. Mark sauntered over, his boots scuffing the pavement with deliberate menace. "Excuse me, miss," he said, stepping into her personal space with an authority that felt more like a threat. Isabel flinched, her body tensing as she yanked out an earbud, clutching her bag closer. "Yes," she replied, her voice small and uncertain. "There's been a report of suspicious activity nearby," Mark said smoothly, his tone practiced and cold. "Can I see your identification?" Isabel's hands shook as she fumbled for an answer. "Don't have my ID with me. I was just waiting for the bus." Mark's lips twisted into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A predator savoring the scent of fear. "No ID, that's against the law. I'll need to check your bag." Isabel's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "Wait, why?" "I didn't do anything," she protested, stepping back instinctively. Mark ignored her, snatching the bag from her grasp with a swift, practiced motion. He tore it open, spilling its contents onto the dirty pavement: lipstick, keys, a crumpled notebook tumbling out in a chaotic heap. Isabel dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather her belongings, her breath hitching. "Don't move," Mark barked, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist, his grip tight enough to bruise. She gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "Please, stop, you are hurting me." Ethan stood a few feet away, his patrol car idling behind him as he watched the scene unfold. His stomach churned with a nauseating mix of guilt and anger, the bitter taste of cowardice rising in his throat. He'd seen Mark pull this routine before targeting the vulnerable, flexing his power just because he could. This wasn't about the law, it was about dominance. A twisted game Mark played with relish. Ethan took a tentative step forward, his voice cautious but firm. "Mark, she's cooperating. Maybe we should let her go." Mark's head whipped around, his eyes narrowing into slits as he sized Ethan up. "Stay out of this," he snapped, his tone laced with venom. Ethan pressed on, his heart hammering. "But she's clearly not." Mark's hand shot up, cutting him off mid-sentence, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Do you want to keep your badge, Ethan? Because if you don't, I can make that happen." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Ethan froze, his fists clenching at his sides as the urge to act battled with the fear of losing everything he'd worked for. Mark released Isabel's wrist with a dismissive flick, tossing her bag back at her feet. "Next time, carry your ID. Now get out of here," he sneered. Isabel scrambled to collect her scattered possessions, tears streaming down her cheeks as she fled, her footsteps uneven against the pavement. Ethan watched her go, shame settling over him like a thick fog. He turned back to Mark, who smirked, his expression dripping with condescension. "You've got a lot to learn about this job, kid. Stick with me, and you'll survive." That evening, Lucy hurried home through the lengthening shadows, her senses heightened after the threatening text. As she neared her building, she noticed a car idling across the street, its engine purring softly in the stillness. The tinted windows obscured the driver, and a prickle of fear danced up her spine. She quickened her pace, her keys jangling in her hand as she darted inside, bolting the door behind her with a trembling hand. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps as she pressed her back against the wood, listening for any sound of pursuit. Her phone buzzed again, and she nearly dropped it in her haste to check the screen. Another unregistered number. "Nice place you've got. Be a shame if something happened to it." Her hands shook as she gripped the device, the words sinking into her like ice. She called Sarah immediately, her voice tight with urgency as she relayed the new threat. Sarah's response was calm but resolute. He'd report it to the police, though Lucy knew Mark's influence might shield him from real consequences. The system he hid behind was a fortress, and she was just one woman trying to breach its walls. In his cramped apartment, Ethan sat hunched over his kitchen table, staring at his phone. He'd found Lucy's name online after hours of searching, her story echoing in his mind like a drumbeat he couldn't silence. He wanted to reach out, to offer something anything, make amends for his inaction. But Mark's threat loomed large, a shadow that darkened every thought. His fingers typed out a message. I know what happened. I want to help, but it's risky for me to come forward. I've seen what Mark is capable of. He hovered over the send button, his hand trembling with indecision. Before he could commit, his phone buzzed with an incoming call, Mark's name flashing across the screen. Ethan's heart sank as he answered, dread pooling in his gut. Ethan, Mark said, his tone deceptively light. I heard you've been asking questions about that woman from the other day. Ethan's blood turned to ice, his mouth dry. I wasn't, he began, but Mark cut him off, his voice sharpening. Don't lie to me. You think I don't know what you're up to. Let me make this clear. If you cross me, your career is over, and I won't stop there. The line went dead, leaving Ethan staring at the blank screen, his breath shallow. He deleted the unsent message to Lucy, his hands shaking as he buried his face in them, the weight of his fear crushing any spark of courage he'd mustered. For the next few days, Lucy couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Every time she left her apartment, her eyes darted to the corners of the street, searching for that idling car or a figure lurking just out of sight. The air felt charged with menace, and her nerves frayed with each passing hour. Yet beneath the fear, her determination grew. Fueled by the lessons she was learning, justice wasn't a gift bestowed by others. It was a battle fought with grit and resolve. Mark's abuse of power was a stark reminder of the consequences when authority went unchecked, a lesson etched into her soul with every threatening message, every memory of his sneering face. She wouldn't let him win, not just for herself, but for Isabel, for the countless others he'd terrorized in the shadows of his badge. With Sarah's guidance and Helen's steadfast support, Lucy pressed forward, gathering evidence and steeling herself for the fight ahead. Ethan, trapped in his own web of fear and guilt, remained a silent witness for now. But the cracks in his resolve were beginning to show, and the ripples of Lucy's defiance were spreading, promising a reckoning that would test the limits of power, courage, and the unyielding pursuit of what was right. Lucy stood alone in her dimly lit apartment, her eyes sweeping over the familiar contours of the room furniture she'd once found comfort in now felt like silent witnesses to her growing resolve. She half expected Mark to materialize from the shadows, his imposing figure looming as it had so many times in her nightmares. But instead of shrinking back into the paralyzing fear that had once gripped her, a fire flickered to life deep within her chest. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a woman ready to reclaim her voice. That evening, she picked up her phone with steady hands and dialed Helen, her closest confidant. When Helen answered, Lucy's voice didn't waver. This isn't just about me anymore, she said, her tone resolute, carrying the weight of a truth she'd only recently uncovered. If he's done this to me, Helen, he's done it to others. I can feel it. I need to find them. I need to make this right. On the other end, Helen's response came warm and unwavering, like a beacon cutting through fog. Then let's do it, Lucy. We'll track down everyone he's hurt, and we'll drag his actions out into the open where he can't hide. The call ended, and Lucy set the phone down, her gaze falling to a crumpled list of advocacy contacts Sarah had emailed her earlier that week. Her hands, once trembling with uncertainty, now felt steady as stone. She had a plan, a purpose, and no intention of turning back. What had started as a personal wound had morphed into something far greater, a crusade against a system that shielded men like Mark, cloaking their abuses in badges and authority. Lucy spent hours reaching out to potential witnesses, her fingers hovering over her keyboard as she typed messages laced with empathy and urgency. Each response, each tentative yes, fueled her determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was dismantling a wall of silence brick by brick, exposing the rot that festered beneath. Meanwhile, Alexander sat hunched over his laptop in their cramped living room, the blue glow of the screen casting sharp shadows across his furrowed brow. His fingers danced across the keys, typing phrases like police abuse, harassment by cops, and victims of Officer Mark into search bars on forums and social media platforms. He scrolled through an endless sea of posts, some angry rants, others vague complaints, until one stopped him cold. The words leaped off the screen. A man in uniform humiliated me on the street, claiming I looked suspicious. He abused his authority, and no one stepped in to stop him. I'm terrified to speak out. The post, written months ago by someone named Marina, hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. His instinct screamed that this wasn't a coincidence. Without hesitation, he clicked to send her a private message, his heart pounding as he typed, "Hi Marina, my name's Alexander. My wife was recently targeted by an officer named Mark in a similar incident. We're building a case to stop him and need to hear from others who've been through this. If you're willing, please let's talk. You're not alone, I promise." Hours ticked by with no reply, and Alexander's mind churned with restless energy. He imagined Marina out there, her life shadowed by the same dread that had once consumed Lucy. What if she was too scared to respond? What if Mark had already gotten to her? He paced the room, his footsteps muffled by the worn rug, doubt gnawing at him. But then his phone buzzed, jolting him from his spiral. Marina's message blinked up at him, cautious and curt. "Who are you? How do I know this isn't a trap?" Relief washed over him, followed by a surge of purpose. He typed back quickly, his words measured but earnest. "I get why you're hesitant. My wife, Lucy, went through what sounds like the same nightmare. We're working with an advocacy group to expose this officer. You can trust us, who just want justice." 2 days later, Marina agreed to meet, but she set the terms with the precision of someone who'd learned to guard herself against the world. A busy cafe, no recordings, and no pressure to commit. Alexander and Lucy arrived early, their nerves humming as they claimed a table near the window. The clatter of dishes and the murmur of conversation filled the air, but their eyes darted toward the door with every new arrival. Finally, a young woman stepped inside, her hoodie pulled tight over her head, sunglasses shielding her eyes. Her posture was rigid, like a deer poised to bolt. "Marina?" Alexander asked softly, rising to his feet. She gave a quick nod but lingered near the table, refusing to sit. "I don't have much time," she said, her voice tight. "What do you want to know?" Alexander gestured toward the chair, keeping his tone gentle. "Anything you're okay sharing. Did Officer Mark hurt you?" Marina's fingers dug into the edge of the chair, her knuckles whitening as she hesitated. Then, in a voice so quiet it barely rose above the cafe's din, she began, "He humiliated me. It was months ago. I was walking home from work. He stopped me, said I matched a thief's description." Lucy leaned forward, her face softening with understanding. "Did he search you?" she asked. Marina nodded, her voice trembling now. "He didn't just search me. He dragged me into an alley, forced me to empty my pockets, my bag. When he found nothing, he said he had to check if I was hiding something on me." Her words faltered, and tears welled in her eyes. "He touched me. He used his badge to make me feel like I was nothing." Lucy's fists clenched beneath the table, her nails biting into her palms, but she kept her tone even. "Did anyone help you?" Marina's laugh was bitter, hollow. "No one. People were there watching, but they just stared. I wanted to scream, but I was too afraid." Alexander met Lucy's gaze, a silent agreement passing between them. "You're not powerless now, Marina," he said firmly. "If you speak up, we can stop him." Panic flashed across her face, and she shook her head. "I can't. He'll find me. He'll ruin me." Before Alexander could argue, Lucy reached out, resting a hand on Marina's arm. "I know how terrifying this is, but Mark gets away with it because we stay quiet. Together, we can fight back. You don't have to face him alone." Marina didn't answer right away. Her eyes locked on the table as if searching for an escape in its grain. At last, she whispered, "I'll think about it," and slipped out into the crowd. That evening, Marina left her job at a small bookstore, her nerves frayed from the meeting. The streets were cloaked in dusk, and every shadow seemed to pulse with menace. She hurried toward the bus stop, her breath shallow, when a car crept up beside her. Its headlights sliced through the gloom, and the passenger window slid down. Her stomach dropped as Mark's face emerged, his cold eyes glinting with a predator's calm. "You've been busy, Marina," he said, his voice smooth but laced with threat. "Talking to the wrong people." She froze, her breath snagging in her throat. "I haven't done anything," she stammered, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. He smirked, leaning closer. "Good. Keep it that way. Stay quiet, and you won't have any problems." Before she could respond, another car screeched to a halt behind Mark's. Alexander stepped out, his face carved with fury. "Mark," he shouted, his voice ringing through the empty street. Mark's smirk vanished as he turned, irritation flickering in his eyes. "You've got a habit of sticking your nose where it doesn't belong," he sneered. Alexander strode forward, placing himself between Mark and Marina. "And you've got a habit of abusing your badge. This ends now." Mark laughed, the sound dripping with contempt. "You think you can stop me? You're in over your head." Alexander didn't flinch. "I think you're scared. Scared the truth's closing in." Mark's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "Careful, or you'll regret this." "Not as much as you will," Alexander shot back, his voice unshaken. For a tense moment, Mark held his gaze, then retreated to his car. "Stay out of my way," he warned. Before peeling off into the night, Marina stood trembling, clutching her bag like a lifeline. "He's not going to stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He will," Alexander said, his tone fierce with conviction. "We'll make sure of it. But we need you." After a long, agonizing pause, Marina nodded. "Okay, I'll testify." That night, Alexander sat across from Lucy at their kitchen table, the weight of the day settling over them. "She's in," he said, relief softening his features. "But we need more. Mark's been at this too long." Lucy's eyes gleamed with determination. "We'll find Thimone by 1. He won't slip through this." With Marina's courage bolstering their resolve, Alexander dove deeper into the search for victims. The kitchen table became a war room, papers and notes sprawling across its surface. His laptop glowed with a new message from Caroline, a cashier at a nearby supermarket. Her story echoed the others, Mark stopping her after a shift, accusing her of theft, searching her bag in front of gawking co-workers. Alexander leaned back, glancing at Lucy. "She could be key. Then let's reach out," Lucy replied, her voice ironclad. At the supermarket, Caroline moved through her shift like a ghost, her hands scanning items with robotic precision. The memory of Mark's hands rifling through her belongings still burned, a wound she'd tried to bury beneath routine. When Alexander approached her during her break, introducing himself and laying out their mission, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "How do I know you're not just stirring up trouble?" she asked, crossing her arms. "I get it," Alexander said, his voice steady. "My wife and others have lived this too. We're building a case to end him for good." Caroline glanced at her co-workers, some whispering behind their hands, and sighed. "I don't want this mess. People here already think I overreacted." "It wasn't nothing," Alexander pressed. "If we stay quiet, he keeps winning." She ran a hand through her hair, her resolve crumbling. "He stopped me after work, said I looked suspicious like I'd stolen something. Searched my bag right there, in front of everyone. It was humiliating, and he found nothing." The stories piled up, each one a testament to Mark's unchecked power and a lesson in the cost of silence. Lucy and Alexander saw it clearly. Justice wasn't just about punishing him. It was about shattering the illusion that authority could excuse cruelty. Every voice they gathered was a step toward that reckoning, a warning to those who wielded power without conscience that consequences would find them, no matter how untouchable they seemed. Caroline's voice trembled with a bitter edge as she recounted the day that still haunted her. "He didn't even hesitate," she said, her words dripping with resentment. "He grabbed me, his hands rough and unyielding, tearing my blouse like it was nothing. Called me a liar right to my face while everyone just stood there, gawking." Her voice cracked under the weight of the memory, and she turned her head away, eyes glistening with unshed tears. The shame burned in her chest, a relentless fire she couldn't extinguish. "I can't relive that," she whispered, almost to herself. "People around here already whisper about me, saying I'm just chasing attention. Like I asked for this." Her fingers clenched into fists, nails digging into her palms as she fought the urge to crumble. Lucy stepped forward, her presence steady amidst Caroline's storm. Her voice carried a quiet strength laced with empathy that felt like a lifeline. "Caroline, I get it more than you know. I've felt those same judging eyes. People who don't bother to understand the truth before they point fingers. But this isn't about them. It's about stopping him, making sure he can't hurt anyone else the way he hurt you. Her words hung in the air, firm yet gentle, a call to something bigger than fear. Caroline lifted her gaze, meeting Lucy's eyes. For a moment, her walls wavered, the defiance in her posture softening as doubt crept in. "You really think it'll change anything?" she asked, her tone fragile, teetering between hope and disbelief. "I do," Lucy replied, her conviction unshakable. "But we need you, Caroline. Your voice, it's the key." Caroline swallowed hard, her throat tight with the weight of the decision. She glanced around the room, at the faces that had once felt like a crowd of accusers, but now seemed like potential allies. "Fine," she said at last, her nod sharp and resolute. "I'll do it. But if this falls apart and blows up in our faces, I'm holding you both responsible." Her words carried a flicker of her old fire, a warning born from a lifetime of broken trust. Meanwhile, Alexander sat across town, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke to Clara, a single mother whose anonymous online post had caught his attention weeks ago. Her story gnawed at him, a raw account of Mark's abuse of power that mirrored Caroline's too closely to ignore. Convincing Clara to meet had been like coaxing a frightened bird from its cage. She'd backed out twice, her voice shaky over the phone as she muttered excuses about her kids and her job. But finally, she agreed, and now she sat on a weathered park bench, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her posture screaming defensiveness. "I don't even know why I'm here," Clara said as Alexander and Lucy approached, her tone clipped and wary. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass, glinting off the playground where her two children chased each other, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension in her voice. "I've got two kids to worry about. I can't afford to stir up trouble or make enemies." Alexander knelt slightly to meet her eye level, his voice soft but steady. "We're not asking you to put yourself in harm's way, Clara. We're asking you to help us protect other mothers, other familiars from going through what you did. Your story could be the difference." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line, her hazel eyes darting to her children as memories flooded back. It was broad daylight. She began, her voice low and unsteady. "I was walking them home from school, their little hands in mine, when he stopped me. Said I looked like someone they were searching for. I asked what I'd done, just trying to understand, and he snapped, got furious, like I'd insulted him. Made me open my bag right there on the sidewalk, rummaging through it while my kids clung to me, confused and scared." Lucy leaned closer, her expression a mix of outrage and compassion. "What happened when he didn't find anything?" Clara's hands trembled as she hugged herself tighter, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "He grabbed my shoulder, hard enough to bruise, said I was obstructing his investigation, then yanked at my shirt, claiming he needed to check for hidden stuff. My kids were sobbing, tugging at my legs, and people just kept walking by, heads down, like it was nothing out of the ordinary." She shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "That's not normal. It's not right." "It's not," Lucy agreed, her voice soft but fierce. "And it's not okay." Clara's gaze flickered to her children again, her heart torn between protecting them and the gnawing need to fight back. "If he finds out I talked, who knows what he'll do? I can't put them through more." Alexander's tone grew resolute, his broad shoulders squared with determination. "Clara, if we don't stand up to him, he'll keep doing this to you, to others. Your kids deserve to grow up in a world where people like him don't get to wield power like a weapon. You can help us build that world." For a long moment, Clara stared at the playground, watching her son push her daughter on a swing, their giggles floating through the crisp air. Her chest tightened, a battle raging within her, fear against the faint ember of courage. Finally, she exhaled, a shaky breath that carried her decision. "All right, I'll do it. But you have to promise me my family stays safe." "You have our word," Alexander said, his voice a solemn vow. That evening, the small office of the Women's Advocacy Group buzzed with a nervous energy as Lucy, Alexander, Marina, Caroline, and Clara gathered. Sarah, the caseworker, greeted them with a warm smile that radiated quiet strength. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her tone a soothing balm to their frayed nerves. "Together, you're giving this case a backbone it wouldn't have otherwise." Marina, A slight woman with dark circles under her eyes glanced at Caroline and Clara. Her voice tentative but earnest. "It's a relief, knowing I'm not the only one. For so long, I thought maybe I was just cursed with bad luck." Caroline's jaw tightened, but her resolve shone through as she met Marina's gaze. "You're not alone. He's preyed on all of us, and it's past time he faced the consequences." Her earlier hesitation had morphed into a steely determination, fueled by the shared pain in the room. Clara nodded, her posture straightening as she found her footing among these women. "We can't let him keep thinking he's above us, above everything. He needs to know he's not untouchable." Sarah outlined their next steps, crafting testimonies, collecting evidence, building a case that could withstand scrutiny. The air in the room shifted, fear giving way to a collective resolve as each woman realized the power they held together. They weren't just victims anymore. They were a force united by a common purpose. As Lucy and Alexander walked home under a sky streaked with fading light, Lucy's brow furrowed. "We're moving forward, but it's still not enough. We need more voices, more proof." Alexander nodded, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "We'll find them." Mark's been at this too long, his time's running out. With 3 women now standing together, the case against Mark began to solidify. But Lucy and Alexander knew the battle was far from won. They vowed to dig deeper, to unearth every shred of evidence and every witness they could find, determined to end his tyranny once and for all. Across town, Ethan sat alone in his cramped apartment, the dim glow of a single lamp casting shadows on the walls. His mind was a battlefield, guilt and fear clashing in a relentless storm. Mark's voice slithered through his thoughts, cold and commanding. "Stick with me, and you'll make it. Cross me, and your career's dust." Ethan's stomach churned as he replayed the scene at the bus stop. Isabel's tear-streaked face, her pleas ignored as Mark loomed over her. He'd stood there, frozen, a bystander to every shattered boundary of decency. The weight of his inaction pressed down on him, a suffocating burden he couldn't shake. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, jolting him from his spiral. A text from Mark: "Patrol tomorrow. Don't forget who's got your back." Ethan dropped the phone like it burned, his hands trembling. It wasn't just Mark's threats that gnawed at him, it was the system that shielded him. A web of loyalty and silence that choked out justice. How could he, a rookie cop barely a year on the force, unravel it? The next day at the precinct, Ethan kept his distance, his eyes averted as Mark swaggered through the halls, his presence a dark cloud. In the break room, during a rare lull, Officer Ryan slid into the seat beside him. Ryan, with his easy demeanor and sharp eyes, had always seemed different ground where others were cynical. "You look like hell, man," Ryan said, keeping his voice low. "What's eating you?" Ethan's pulse quickened, his fingers tightening around his coffee mug. Ryan was a decent guy, but trust was a luxury Ethan couldn't afford. "It's complicated," he muttered, staring into the black depths of his drink. Ryan leaned in, his tone dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Is it Mark?" Ethan's head snapped up, eyes wide, but he stayed silent. Ryan pressed on undeterred. "You don't have to say it. I've heard the rumors, seen the way he operates. He's been a problem forever, but no one's got the guts to call it out. They're all too scared." "Scared for good reason," Ethan shot back, his voice barely audible. "He's got people higher up covering for him." Ryan nodded, his expression grim. "Yeah, he does. But here's the thing, staying quiet doesn't fix it. It just makes you part of it." The words hit Ethan like a punch, igniting a spark of anger not at Ryan, but at the cowardice he saw in himself. "What am I supposed to do?" he demanded, frustration bleeding through. "If I talk, I'm finished." Ryan's gaze didn't waver. "Or maybe you'll be the one to finally bring him down. It's your call." "Ethan, just know the longer you wait, the heavier it gets." That night, Ethan paced his apartment, Ryan's words looping through his mind like a broken record. His phone sat on the table, open to the advocacy group's number he'd saved days ago, but never dared to use. His heart pounded as he grabbed it, fingers hovering over the screen. Before he could second-guess himself, he dialed. "Women's Advocacy Network, this is Sarah," came a calm, professional voice. Ethan's throat closed up, panic urging him to hang up, but he forced the words out. Rough and halting, "My name's Ethan. I'm a cop. I need to talk to someone about misconduct. Thank you for reaching out, Sarah said, her gentleness cutting through his fear. Can you tell me more? He took a shaky breath, the dam breaking. I've seen things. Me partner, Mark, he's abusing his power. Targeting women. I didn't stop him. I just stood there. It's not too late to make it right, Sarah replied, her voice a steady anchor. Anything you can share could change everything. I've got stuff, Ethan admitted, his resolve hardening. Dates, incidents, even texts he sent me. But if I come forward, he'll ruin me. We understand the stakes, Sarah said, firm but reassuring. If you're willing to meet, we can protect you and make sure your testimony counts. Ethan hesitated, then nodded to himself. Okay, let's meet. The next evening, in a quiet cafe tucked away from prying eyes, Ethan sat across from Sarah and Lucy, his hands unsteady as he slid a stack of notes across the table. Mark thinks he's untouchable, he said, his voice low and bitter. He's got friends in high places, uses them to bury anything that comes up. But these are things I saw. Isabel, Clara, Caroline went after all of them while I was right there. Lucy's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp with restrained anger. Why didn't you stop him? Ethan looked down, shame etching lines into his face. I was terrified. Thought keeping my head down would save me. But it didn't. It just made me guilty too. Sarah rested a hand on Lucy's arm, a silent plea for patience. Ethan, this is huge, she said. Your account could tie everything together. Are you ready to go on record? He swallowed hard, the weight of his choice settling into his bones. Yeah, I have to. He's got to be stopped. 2 days later, during patrol, Mark's eyes bored into Ethan as they cruised through the city. You've been off lately, Mark said, his tone casual but laced with suspicion. Just tired, huh? Yeah, just tired, Ethan replied, keeping his voice even, his hands gripping the wheel a little too tight. Mark smirked, his gaze lingering. You're not thinking about doing anything dumb, are you? What's that supposed to mean? Ethan asked, forcing neutrality into his tone. Mark's eyes glinted with a warning. You know what it means. Don't test me, kid. Ethan's pulse raced, but he kept his face blank, the truth burning in his chest. He was done being Mark's shadow. Justice wasn't just a word anymore, it was a reckoning, and he'd help deliver it, no matter the cost. Mark's abuse of power had gone unchecked for too long, and the consequences were finally closing in. A storm he couldn't outrun. The air in the precinct parking lot was thick with tension that night, the faint hum of distant traffic blending with the rustle of leaves skittering across the asphalt. Ethan sat hunched in the driver's seat of his beat-up sedan, his knuckles still white from the fists he'd clenched earlier that day. Beside him, Ryan leaned against the open passenger window, his breath fogging slightly in the cool March air. Ethan's voice was low, almost swallowed by the weight of his confession. I talked to them, he said, eyes fixed on the dashboard as if it held some answer he couldn't find within himself. The advocacy group, they're taking my statement. Ryan's head tilted, his face flickering with a mix of astonishment and something softer pride. Perhaps, he let out a slow whistle, rubbing a hand across his stubbled jaw. That's no small move. Ethan, takes guts to put yourself out there like that. His tone was warm, but there was an edge to it, like he knew the storm that might follow. Ethan's shoulders slumped, and he shook his head, the dim glow of a nearby street lamp casting shadows across his tired features. Doesn't feel like enough, he admitted, his voice cracking under the strain of guilt he'd carried for too long. Mark's still out there, strutting around like he owns the place, doing whatever he damn well pleases. The bitterness in his words hung heavy, a silent accusation against the system that had shielded Mark for years. Ryan straightened up, crossing his arms as he met Ethan's gaze. Listen to me's more than most would dare to do. You've started something here. Stick with it, and it could be the key to dragging him down for good. His words were firm, a lifeline tossed into the churning sea of Ethan's doubts. And in the days that followed, Ethan's resolve hardened, his testimony every date, every time. Every specific incident he'd painstakingly documented became the bedrock of their case. Pages of his neat handwriting corroborated the victims' stories, lending a weight that couldn't be ignored. It was a quiet act of defiance, but one that roared with the promise of justice. Across town, in a cluttered advocacy office lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs, Lucy paced the worn carpet, her hands twisting together as she processed the news. When Alexander told her about Ethan's statement, her chest tightened with a storm of emotions fairy at Mark's unchecked arrogance, and a fragile glimmer of relief that someone was finally stepping into the fray. "He's actually doing it," she said, her voice trembling with the intensity of her reaction. "Ethan's stepping up. This could turn the tide." Her dark eyes flicked to Alexander, searching his face for reassurance. Alexander leaned against a desk piled high with files, his brow furrowed as he nodded slowly. "Let's hope it's enough," he replied, his tone measured but heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. He ran a hand through his graying hair, the lines on his face deepening as he considered the battle still to come. "Mark's not going to roll over. He'll fight dirty, you know that." His words were a warning, but they only fueled the fire growing in Lucy's chest. The team felt it to a surge of momentum, like a wave gathering strength before it crashes. Yet beneath their hope lingered the unspoken truth. Mark was a predator cornered, and that made him dangerous. In a small conference room nearby, Rose sat at the head of a long table, her posture rigid with determination. The room smelled of stale coffee and ink, the walls lined with shelves sagging under the weight of legal briefs, witness statements, and stacks of dog-eared files. Beside her, Pablo, a weary attorney with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, pored over the latest evidence with the precision of a surgeon. His years in the courtroom had honed him into a force of nature, and Rose trusted him implicitly. "This isn't just about Mark anymore," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "His buddies in the department are circling the wagon string to smear our witnesses. Bury the case before it even breathes. We've got to be flawless." Pablo didn't look up from the file in his hands, but his nod was curt, decisive. "Ethan's testimony is our cornerstone," he said, flipping a page with a flick of his wrist. "It's detailed, consistentum near bulletproof. But Mark's team, they'll go after him hard. If they can convince a jury he's just a bitter ex-cop with a grudge, they'll unravel everything we've built." His words were matter of fact, but they landed like stones in the room. Around the table, the women listened with rapt attention, each grappling with her own storm of nerves. Lucy sat with her arms crossed, her jaw tight. Marina fidgeted relentlessly, her fingers twisting a loose thread on her sleeve until it snapped. Caroline sat still as a statue, her gaze fixed on the table, while Clara's hands trembled faintly in her lap. It was Marina who broke the silence, her voice small but piercing. "What if they rip us apart up there?" she asked, her eyes darting to Pablo. "On the stand, I mean. What if they make us look like liars?" Pablo set the file down, leaning forward with a steady gaze that seemed to anchor her. "They'll try," he said plainly. "That's their game. But that's why we're here to make sure you're ready." He tapped the folder in front of him, a thick stack of notes and questions. "We'll go over every trick they might pull, every question they'll throw at you. You'll know how to answer without giving them an inch." His confidence was a bomb, but the work ahead loomed large. As the session stretched into the evening, Pablo slipped into the role of the defense, his tone turning sharp and relentless. He zeroed in on Marina first, his voice cutting through the room like a whip. "You say Officer Mark harassed you, but isn't it true you've had run-ins with the law before?" Marina froze, her breath catching as color drained from her face. The question hung there, cold and accusing, dredging up a past she'd fought to leave behind. She glanced at Rose, who gave a subtle nod, a silent push to stand her ground. Marina swallowed hard, her voice shaky but resolute. "Yes, I've had trouble before, but that doesn't mean he had the right to put his hands on me, to treat me like I was nothing." Pablo eased back, dropping the act with a faint nod of approval. "Good. Keep your cool, stick to what happened. They'll try to shake you, but if you don't bite, they've got nothing." His words steadied her, but the fear lingered in her eyes, a reminder of the stakes they all faced. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit office across the city, Mark reclined in a leather chair, the faint glow of a desk lamp illuminating the smug curve of his smirk. Officer Turner, his longtime ally, lounged across from him, one leg crossed over the other, exuding the confidence of a man who'd bent the rules too many times to count. "You're in the clear," Turner said, his voice dripping with assurance. We've buried worse messes than this. A couple calls, a little pressure, half their evidence could vanish by morning. He flashed a grin. All teeth and arrogance. Mark's smirk widened, but his eyes remained cold, calculating. And Ethan? He asked, leaning forward slightly. He's the loose thread here. Turner waved a hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. Ethan's nothing. I'll handle him, twist him up so bad he won't know what hit him. As for the women, we'll dig up dirt, spread some whispers, make them look like gold diggers chasing a payout. By the time I'm done, no one'll take them seriously. Mark's expression darkened, a shadow of menace crossing his face. Do it, he said, his voice low and final. I want this dead before it even hits the courtroom. Back at the advocacy office, Rose's phone buzzed with an email that made her stomach drop. She scanned the screen, her lips pressing into a thin line as she read aloud. They're claiming some of our evidence was mishandled, saying the supermarket surveillance footage didn't have a proper warrant. Her voice was tight, frustration simmering beneath her calm exterior. Lucy's heart sank, her hands clenching into fists. That footage backs up everything Caroline said. She protested, her voice rising with desperation. Pablo held up a hand, his expression unruffled. Don't lose it yet. We saw this coming. Thayer grasping at straws. I'll file a motion to fight it, prove it's legit. But it's a wake-up call. They'll exploit every crack they can find. His calm steadied the room. But the pressure was mounting, a vice tightening around them all. Late that night, Clara's voice crackled through Lucy's phone, trembling with panic. I don't think I can do this, she whispered, the words spilling out in a rush. Mark's got eyes everywhere. What if they go after my kids? Lucy's chest ached at the raw fear in her friend's voice, but she forced her own tone to steady. Clara, I get it, you were terrified, and so am I, but if we walk away now, he wins. Your story, what you saw, what he did, it could stop him from hurting someone else's family. You're stronger than you think. I've seen it when he shamed you in front of everyone. You still stood up for your kids. We need that strength now. The line went quiet, Clara's ragged breathing the only sound. Then, in a whisper so soft it barely carried, she said, I'll stay. It was a fragile promise, but it held. The next morning, Rose gathered the group in the advocacy office, the air thick with the scent of fresh coffee and nervous energy. She stood tall, her voice unwavering as she addressed them. They've thrown every dirty trick they've got at us, but we're still standing. Now it's time to end this. Pablo passed out crisp copies of their statements, his hands steady despite the weight of the moment. Read these one last time, he instructed. The defense will try to trip you up, twist your words into knots. Stay calm, stick to what's real, and don't let them bait you. Marina's hand shot up, her voice tentative. What if they bring up stuff from our past, stuff that's got nothing to do with Mark? Rose met her gaze, unflinching. They will. When they do, Onite answer quick, then steer it back. Like this, yes, that happened. But it doesn't change what Officer Mark did to me on June 12th. Keep the focus where it belongs. The group nodded, their resolve hardening like steel in a forge. That afternoon, outside the courthouse, Lucy stood shoulder to shoulder with Alexander, the spring breeze tugging at her hair. The building loomed before them, its stone facade cold and imposing. This is it, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Everything we've fought for, it all comes down to today. Alexander placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but kind. You've done it right, Lucy. Now we let the truth do its work. She glanced at the others, Marina smoothing her skirt with nervous hands, Caroline staring ahead with quiet fire, Clara clutching her purse like a shield, and Ethan lingering at the edge, his face a mask of conflicted determination. They'd come so far, bound by a shared purpose that outweighed their fear. Inside, the courtroom was a hush of anticipation, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and old paper. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder, shattering the silence as proceedings began. Mark sat at the defense table, his posture relaxed, but his eyes gleamed with a predator's certainty. Across the room, Lucy sat with Marina, Caroline, and Clara, their faces set with a resolve that belied the knots in their stomachs. Pablo rose first, his opening statement a steady drumbeat of truth. Your Honor, this case is about a man who turned his badge into a weapon. We'll show you testimonies and evidence a clear pattern of abuse and a system that failed to stop it. Mark's lawyer, Douglas Price, stood with a practiced smile, his tailored suit gleaming under the lights. The defense will prove these claims are a sham, a spiteful campaign to ruin a dedicated officer. My client has served this city honorably and will show his innocence beyond doubt. His voice was silk over steel, but it didn't shake the women's resolve. Marina took the stand first, her hands shaking as she swore the oath, the Bible cool against her palms. She straightened, her voice finding strength as she spoke. He stopped me on my way home, said I'd stolen something, no proof, no reason. Dragged me into an alley, searched me, touched me where he had no right to. Price rose, his smile sharp as a blade. Miss Marina, you've had legal troubles before, haven't you? Why should we believe you now? Her cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. Yeah, I've had problems, but that doesn't give him a free pass to violate me. I know what he did, and it was wrong. Price leaned in, his tone dripping with skepticism. Or maybe this is a chance to cash and spin a tale for sympathy. Marina's eyes flashed, but her voice stayed steady. I've got nothing to gain from this except knowing he can't hurt anyone else. That's why I'm here. Pablo stood, his voice firm. Objection consoles harassing the witness. Sustained. The judge snapped, and Price sat back with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Next came Caroline, her steps deliberate as she approached the stand, tension coiling in her shoulders like a spring. Mark humiliated me at work, she said, her voice clear despite the tremor beneath it. Grabbed my bag, tore my blouse open in front of every neck-customers. Carr called me a thief with no proof. Price pounced, his tone cutting. No video, no witnesses willing to back you up. How do we know this isn't just hearsay? Caroline's chin lifted, her eyes blazing. I don't need a camera to tell the truth. My co-workers were scared silent. Just like I was until I decided I'd had enough. Price's voice sharpened, a needle probing for weakness. So you're admitting it's your word alone? Caroline leaned forward, her voice steady as stone. My word's enough when it's true. He abused his power, and I won't let him hide from it. The exchange crackled with tension, a stark reminder of the cost of standing up and the deeper lesson that justice demands courage. In the face of doubt, as the trial unfolded, each testimony built a mosaic of accountability, a reckoning for the arrogance of unchecked power. Mark's allies might twist and scheme, but the truth had a weight of its own, and it was pressing down, relentless and unyielding. For Ethan, Lucy, Marina, Caroline, Clara, and the others, this wasn't just a fight for themselves, it was a stand against a system that had too long turned a blind eye, a testament to the consequences that follow when power forgets its purpose. The air in the courtroom hung heavy with tension, thick enough to choke on. As Clara stood before the judge, her voice trembling yet fierce with a resolve forged through years of silence, she could feel the weight of every eye on her, the murmurs rippling through the room like a restless tide, but she pressed on. I'll admit it, she said, her words cutting through the stillness. People are terrified of him. That's why it's taken this long for anyone to speak up. Fear kept us quiet, but it doesn't erase what he did, it doesn't make it any less true. Her chest tightened as she spoke, the memory of that day clawing its way back to the surface. She could still see her children's wide, frightened eyes, their small hands clutching at her as Mark loomed over them on that sun-scorched street. He'd searched her without cause, his badge gleaming like a blade in the daylight, a symbol not of protection but of unchecked power. Her kids had been paralyzed with terror, their innocence shattered in an instant, and now, standing here, she felt the sting of that violation all over again. Douglas Price, Mark's attorney, leaned forward in his chair, his sharp gaze fixed on Clara as he prepared to dismantle her story. You say your children saw this alleged incident, he began, his tone dripping with skepticism. So where are they now? Why aren't they here to back up your claims? His words were a calculated jab, meant to paint her as unreliable, a mother grasping at straws. But Clara didn't falter. Her eyes blazed as she shot back. Their children. They shouldn't have to stand here and relive the nightmare he forced on us. I'm their mother, it's my job to protect them, to speak for them when they can't. Her voice rose, raw and unyielding, echoing off the courtroom walls. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was their shield, their advocate. pouring every ounce of her strength into this moment. The prosecutor, Pablo, seized the opening, stepping forward with a quiet confidence that belied the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. He held up a single sheet of papyrus written statement from Clara's eldest child, a boy no older than 12, who'd painstakingly recounted the incident in his own shaky handwriting. The details were vivid, the way Mark's voice had boomed, the way his hands had rummaged through Clara's belongings with no regard for her dignity, the way her little brother had whimpered behind her skirt. Price opened his mouth to object, his face twisting with frustration, but the judge's gavel came down swiftly, silencing him. The statement stood, a small but unshakable pillar bolstering Clara's truth, and in that moment, she felt a flicker of hope pierce through the suffocating weight of her fear. Then came Ethan, a young officer whose broad shoulders seemed to carry the burden of a decision that had haunted him for months. As he took the stand, the room seemed to still, the collective breath of the audience held in suspense. He adjusted the microphone with trembling fingers, his eyes deliberately avoiding Mark's piercing stare, locking instead on the judge's stern face. "I worked with Mark," Ethan began, his voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside him. "I saw it all up close, how he singled out women, how he wielded intimidation like a tool, how he crossed every line we're supposed to uphold." The memories flooded back as he spoke, late-night patrols where Mark's temper flared, the way he'd smirk as he towered over trembling civilians, the unspoken expectation that Ethan would look the other way. It had gnawed at him, a quiet rot in his conscience, until he couldn't bear the silence any longer. Price pounced, his voice sharp and accusing. "Officer Ethan, isn't it true you're bitter, that you were reprimanded for insubordination?" "This sounds personal." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't waver. "No," he said, his tone firm, cutting through Price's insinuation like a blade. "I wasn't reprimanded for insubordination, was disciplined for challenging Mark's methods. There's a difference, and it's an important one. I'm not here out of spite. I'm here because I saw a pattern of abuse that went ignored for too long," he went on, detailing specific moments, dates etched into his memory, descriptions so precise they matched the victim's stories like pieces of a grim puzzle. Each word he spoke was a brick in the wall of evidence, a bridge connecting the scattered accounts into a damning whole. When Mark finally took the stand, the atmosphere shifted again, crackling with a new kind of electricity. He sat with a practiced calm, his uniform crisp, his posture rigid, as if he could will the room to see him as the authority he believed himself to be. "These allegations are ridiculous," he said, his voice clipped but steady, a mask of control he'd worn for years. "Everything I did was within the scope of my duty, nothing more, nothing less." But beneath that composure, there was a flicker of something darker, anger, perhaps, or the first stirrings of doubt. Pablo approached, his steps deliberate, his questions honed to strike at the core of Mark's defense. "Officer Mark," he began, "can you explain why multiple victims, strangers to one another, have described the same patterns of misconduct from you, the same threats, the same aggression?" Mark shrugged, his lips curling into a faint sneer. "Coincidence. People will say anything to tear down someone in power." His words were dismissive, but his fingers twitched against the armrest, betraying the tension simmering beneath his cool exterior. Pablo pressed harder. "And Ethan's testimony? He worked beside you day in, day out. Is he lying too?" Mark's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. "He's young, inexperienced. He doesn't get how this job works." His voice was tighter now, the cracks beginning to show. Pablo held up a transcript, Ethan's words printed in stark black ink. He listed specific instance times, places, actions. "Can you refute them?" Mark's eyes narrowed. "I did what I had to in the moment," he snapped, his calm slipping like sand through his fingers. Then Pablo dropped the bombshell, text messages, pulled from Mark's own phone, warning Ethan to stay loyal or face consequences. The evidence glowed on the projector screen, undeniable and cold. "I don't recall sending those," Mark said, his face darkening, his voice dropping to a low growl. "But you admit they're from your number," Pablo countered, leaning in. Mark hesitated, his mind racing for an escape. "Yes," he finally muttered, "but they're out of context." Pablo's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. What context, Officer Mark, justifies threatening a colleague to keep quiet? Mark opened his mouth, then closed it, his expression faltering as the courtroom buzzed with whispers. For the first time, the invincible facade he'd built began to crumble, exposing the man beneath a man who'd mistaken power for justice. In his closing argument, Pablo turned to the jury, his voice resonant with conviction. This isn't just about one man's crimes, it's about accountability. It's about proving that no one, not even those who wear a badge, is above the law. The evidence, the testimonies, they all scream one truth: Mark used his authority to hurt, not to help. Price fought back, his defense aggressive and loud, painting the victims as opportunists, the evidence as flimsy. But his words rang hollow against the chorus of voices. Clara's fury, Ethan's courage, the quiet pain of others who'd come forward. As the day ended, the tension lingered like smoke, curling around Lucy, who sat with her hands balled into fists, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. "It's not over," she whispered to Alexander, her voice barely audible. "But it's a beginning," he replied, his eyes fixed on the horizon of what was to come. Outside, the story spilled into the streets, igniting headlines and sparking a firestorm online. Officer accused of systemic abuse, victims break their silence. One article blared, weaving together the testimonies of Clara, Marina, Caroline, and Ethan into a tapestry of resistance. Social media exploded, hashtags like Justice for Lucy and Hold Cope Sacantal trending as strangers rallied around the cause. Mark sat in Price's office, scrolling through the comments on his phone, his knuckles white as he gripped the device. Finally, someone standing up to this, one read. "Why does the system keep shielding these people?" Another demanded. Price watched him, his expression unreadable. "We can still spin this," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "Discredit them, call it a witch hunt. People move on." Mark's eyes were cold, his frustration boiling over. "It's not enough. They're turning on me." Even the department's stepping back. Price nodded. "They won't defend you outright, but they won't let you drown either. We've got friends." Mark leaned back, a predator cornered but not yet defeated. "Then we use them. I'm not taking the fall." Meanwhile, Ethan's testimony became its own headline. The blue wall cracks, officer turns on colleague. The article hailed him as a hero, a lone voice daring to shatter the code of silence. Back at the precinct, his former allies whispered in shadowed corners. "Did you hear what Ethan said?" One muttered, his voice thick with unease. "Turner." Mark's loyal shadow, scowled. "He's a traitor, letting civilians run the show." But another officer, quieter, less certain, murmured, "Or maybe he's just done covering for Mark." Turner's glare could have cut glass. But the doubt lingered, a crack in the brotherhood widening with every passing hour. The next day, Pablo unveiled an email chain. Subtle pressure from Mark to a superior, nudging complaints against him into oblivion. "Can you explain why these were buried?" Pablo asked, his tone deceptively mild. Mark leaned forward, his voice sharp. Those were nonsense complaints, people dodging accountability. But Pablo didn't relent. All of them, every single one, describing the same intimidation, the same overreach. Mark's face flushed. "Yes, criminals lie. That's what they do." The judge's frown deepened, a silent warning. And Mark forced a breath, his control fraying at the edges. Outside, protesters gathered, their signs a forest of defiance. "Protect the people, not the badge." Clara stood on the courthouse steps, her children clinging to her, their small faces solemn. Lucy joined Marina and Caroline nearby, the trio bound by shared scars. "The louder this gets, the harder it is to bury," Lucy said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "It also makes him desperate," Marina warned, her eyes scanning the crowd. Lucy nodded. "And he knows he's losing." Inside, Price tried to pivot. "Your Honor, this trial's tainted by public hysteria. Me client can't get a fair shake." Pablo was on his feet in an instant. "Objection. The defense is dodging the facts. The public's outrage doesn't change the evidence." "Sustained," the judge ruled. And Pablo pressed on, holding up a report where Mark had labeled victims troublemakers. "Was this shorthand too?" he asked, his voice a blade. Mark's jaw locked. "It was casual. He didn't mean it like that." "And the threats to Ethan?" Pablo pushed. "Loyalty. Mark spat. Matters in this job. Pablo's eyes narrowed. Loyalty to what, Officer Mark? To you? Or to the law you swore to uphold? The question hung in the air, unanswered. As the trial barreled toward its reckoning, a stark lesson in justice and the ruinous cost of power unchecked, the air in the courtroom crackled with tension, a palpable weight pressing down on everyone inside as Mark leaned forward in his seat, his voice rising above the murmurs like a jagged blade slicing through the hum of anticipation. Loyalty, he declared, his tone sharp and unyielding, is to the system that keeps us safe. His words reverberated, a defiant proclamation that carried the weight of years spent wielding authority like a shield. Around him, the room buzzed with restless energy reporters scribbling furiously, spectators shifting in their seats, and the judge's stern gaze cutting through the chaos. Pablo, standing a few feet away, took a deliberate step back, his face unreadable but his silence deliberate, letting Mark's outburst hang in the air like a dark omen. That evening, under the dim, flickering lights of a secluded bar tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city, Mark met Turner. The place smelled of stale beer and regret, the kind of spot where secrets festered in the shadows. Mark's voice was low, a growl rumbling from deep within his chest as he leaned across the scratched wooden table. "This is spiraling out of control," he said, his eyes glinting with a mix of fury and desperation. "If I go down, I'm not going alone. He'll drag every last one of them with me." Turner, his face etched with lines of exhaustion and grim resolve, nodded slowly, his fingers tightening around a half-empty glass. "We've done everything we could," he replied, his voice heavy with the burden of complicity. "But the pressure's too much now. The higher-ups won't stick their necks out for you if it means their own heads roll." Mark's fist crashed against the table, the sound sharp and startling in the quiet bar. Glasses rattling as he spat. "Cowards, every single one of them." Turner hesitated, his eyes darting to the side before he spoke again, his words cautious but pointed. "You might need to cut a deal, Mark. Admit to something small, take a light punishment, and walk away with your life intact." Mark's glare was venomous, his jaw clenched so tight it seemed his teeth might shatter. "I don't admit to anything," he snarled. "They'll have to drag me out of this kicking and screaming." As the trial hurtled toward its climax, the city outside the courthouse seemed to hold its breath. Public interest swelled into a feverish obsession, every news channel replaying testimony clips, every newspaper splashing bold headlines across their front pages. Advocacy groups seized the moment, their voices rising above the clamor with a statement demanding sweeping reforms that reached far beyond Mark's case. At home, Lucy sat cross-legged on her worn couch, the paper trembling slightly in her hands as she read the words aloud to Alexander. Her voice was steady, but laced with a quiet fire. "This isn't just about one man anymore," she said, her eyes lifting to meet his. "It's about tearing down a system that's been broken for too long and it's working." Alexander leaned against the armrest, his brow furrowed in thought. "People are finally paying attention," he said, his tone a mix of hope and resolve. "But we can't let up now." Lucy's lips pressed into a determined line as she set the paper down. "The final trial has to be the nail in the coffin," she said firmly, her words carrying the weight of a vow. The courtroom on the last day was a cauldron of raw emotion and barely contained chaos. The air felt thick, electric with the anticipation of a reckoning long overdue. Mark sat at the defense table, his posture rigid, his face a carefully constructed mask of defiance that betrayed none of the storm raging within him. Across the room, Lucy, Marina, Caroline, and Clara sat shoulder to shoulder, their presence a silent but unshakable testament to their shared strength. Each woman carried her own scars, Lucy with her quiet resolve, Marina with her hesitant courage, Caroline with her newfound boldness, and Clara with a mother's fierce protectiveness. Their eyes met briefly, a flicker of solidarity passing between them as Pablo rose to his feet. His closing argument was a masterstroke of calm authority, his voice cutting through the tension like a steady hand guiding a ship through a storm. "This case," he began, his gaze sweeping across the jury, "is about accountability. The testimonies of these women brave, unwavering, and corroborated by Officer Ethan's insider knowledge paint a picture of abuse that cannot be dismissed. Officer Mark didn't wield his badge as a shield to protect. He turned it into a weapon to dominate. Today, we ask you to send a message that rings loud and clear. No one stands above the law. The jury listened intently, some leaning forward, others scribbling notes. Their faces a mix of skepticism and dawning realization. Douglas Price, Mark's attorney, rose with a practiced air of confidence. Though a faint tremor in his hands betrayed his unease, his voice was smooth, persuasive. As he launched into his final plea, "My client has served this community with dedication for over a decade," he said, gesturing toward Mark with a flourish. "The allegations against him are a patchwork of inconsistencies, driven by personal grudges and shaky evidence. To convict him on such a flimsy foundation would be a travesty and insult to justice itself." His words hung in the air, a desperate bid to sway hearts and minds. But the room remained restless, unconvinced. The judge, a stern figure with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, nodded curtly, signaling the next phase. Pablo stood once more, his posture radiating quiet confidence. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying a note of anticipation, "the prosecution would like to call an additional witness." A ripple of surprise swept through the courtroom, gasps and whispers erupting like a sudden gust of wind. Mark shifted in his seat, his mask slipping for a fleeting moment as unease flickered in his eyes. He leaned toward Price, whispering fiercely, "What the hell is this?" Price's frown deepened, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. "This is unexpected," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the growing murmur. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, and a woman stepped into the room, her presence commanding despite the simplicity of her attire. She was middle-aged, her hair streaked with silver, her face etched with the quiet resolve of someone who had weathered storms and emerged stronger. "Your Honor," Pablo announced, "this is Jana Reeves, a former officer who worked alongside the defendant years ago." Jana took the stand, her movements deliberate as she placed her hand on the Bible and swore the oath. Her eyes met the judge's without flinching, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, resonant with the weight of truth. "I served with Officer Mark early in his career," she began, her gaze drifting briefly to Mark, who stared back with a mixture of disbelief and simmering rage. "I saw things that troubled me deeply, targeting vulnerable people, excessive force, a blatant disregard for the rules we were trained to uphold." Price shot to his feet, his voice sharp with indignation. "Objection. Your Honor, this is hearsay. The witness has no direct tie to the incidents in question." The judge's gavel hovered, but his ruling came swiftly. "Overruled. The court will hear her testimony." "Continue, Ms. Reeves." Jana nodded, undeterred. "I reported his behavior to my superiors over and over," she said, her tone growing firmer with each word. "Nothing happened. Instead, I was labeled a troublemaker, pushed out of the department for daring to speak up. When I heard about this case, I couldn't stay silent any longer. This isn't new, it's a pattern, one that's been buried and ignored for far too long." Pablo seized the opening, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Ms. Reeves, do you believe the department shielded Officer Mark at the expense of justice?" Jeanette's answer was immediate, unflinching. "Yes," and it let him grow bolder, escalate to what we're seeing today. Mark's composure shattered like glass under a hammer. "She's lying," he shouted, bolting upright, his face flushed with fury. The judge's gavel slammed down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Order, Officer Mark, sit down." But Mark was beyond restraint, his voice rising in a frantic crescendo. "This is a witch hunt. They're all out to get me." Price grabbed his arm, hissing through gritted teeth. "You're digging your own grave, sit down." Mark sank back into his chair, trembling with rage, his outburst leaving a bitter taste in the air. Pablo's final cross-examination was a slow, deliberate unraveling. He faced Mark, his eyes piercing, and asked, "Officer Mark, can you look this court in the eye and deny that you abused your authority?" The question landed like a boulder in still water, sending ripples of tension through the room. Mark's gaze darted to the jury, their faces a mix of curiosity and judgment. To the women across the room, their eyes burning with quiet triumph, and finally to Price, who offered no lifeline. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until Mark muttered, his voice barely audible, I did what I thought was necessary. Pablo pressed harder, unrelenting. That's not an answer. Mark's desperation broke through, his voice rising in a jagged shout. Fine. Yes, I used my position to control things. Sometimes you have to bend the rules to get results. The courtroom erupted, gasps and murmurs swelling into a cacophony. Price buried his face in his hands, the gesture of a man watching a ship sink with no hope of salvage. Mark's admission hung there, a dark cloud casting shadows over everything he'd fought to protect. The judge's instructions to the jury were curt, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. And then came the white and agonizing stretch of hours that felt like days. When the foreman finally returned, his face somber, the room held its breath. On the charges of abuse of power and violation of personal rights, he read, "We find the defendant, Officer Mark Collins, guilty." Relief washed through the air like a tidal wave, mingled with quiet sobs from the gallery. Mark's shoulders slumped, his bravado crumbling into dust as the judge's voice rang out. "Officer Collins, your actions betrayed the trust of this community. You are sentenced to 5 years in prison and permanently barred from law enforcement." Outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Lucy, Marina, Caroline, and Clara gathered, the weight of their victory settling over them like a hard-won blanket. Marina brushed a tear from her cheek, her voice soft but trembling with emotion. "We did it," she said, almost as if she couldn't believe it herself. Clara, standing with her arms crossed, nodded slowly. "It's not just about us," she added, her eyes distant but fierce. "It's about everyone he hurt who couldn't fight back." Ethan approached then, his uniform slightly rumpled, his face a map of relief and lingering guilt. "I'm sorry it took me so long to do the right thing," he said, his voice cracking slightly. Lucy met his gaze, her smile faint but genuine. "What matters is you did it," she replied, offering him a small piece of the grace she'd fought so hard to reclaim. In the weeks that followed, the trial's echoes rippled outward, impossible to ignore. News outlets devoured the story, their headlines a chorus of praise for the courage of Lucy and the others. While activists seized the momentum, their calls for reform growing louder, more urgent. At the precinct, the air had shifted, conversions once steeped in blind loyalty now tinged with unease. Ethan stood in the break room one morning, a lukewarm coffee in hand, facing Ryan, a younger officer with a sharp mind and a quiet demeanor. "You were right," Ethan admitted, his voice low but firm. "Staying silent didn't protect any oneiest of all me." Ryan nodded, his face thoughtful, a spark of something new in his eyes. "What you did took guts," he said. "It's making me rethink the things I've let slide. I always thought being a good cop meant sticking by the team. But now I see it's about standing for what's right." Across the room, Turner watched them, his expression a mask of neutrality, though the weight of his own choices seemed to press down on him, a silent burden he couldn't shake. Lucy, meanwhile, threw herself into the fight with a fervor that surprised even her. Partnering with the women's rights group that had bolstered her case, she spoke at rallies, her voice carrying the strength of someone who'd walked through fire and emerged unbroken. At a community meeting, she stood before a packed room, the faces before her a mix of hope and hesitation. "This isn't just about one officer or one trial," she said, her words steady but burning with passion. "It's about a system that's cared more about protecting its own than the people it's supposed to serve. We have to demand better for ourselves, for our kids, for tomorrow." The applause was thunderous, but Lucy's eyes lingered on those who sat quietly, their uncertainty mirroring the fear she'd once felt. She knew change started there, in the hearts of the hesitant. Clara joined her one day, her 2 children trailing behind her, their small hands clutching her coat. "I never thought I'd be part of something like this," Clara confessed, her voice soft but steady. "But watching you stand up, it woke something in me I didn't know was there." Lucy smiled, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You had it all along," she said. "Sometimes it just takes seeing someone else fight to realize you can too." Caroline, too, found her voice, channeling her energy into her workplace, drafting policies to shield others from the kind of abuse she'd endured. "If someone like Mark ever tries that again," she told Lucy one evening over coffee, her eyes blazing with determination, "they won't get away with it." Marina, who'd once shrunk from the spotlight, emerged as a fierce advocate, her transformation startling even herself. During a televised interview, her voice trembled at first but grew stronger with every word. "For so long, I thought my voice didn't matter," she said, her eyes locked on the camera. "But Lucy and the others showed me there's power in standing together, even when it feels like the world's against you." Her words struck a chord, igniting a flood of responses from others who'd felt the same silencing weight. The lesson was clear, etched into every moment of their struggle. Justice wasn't a gift handed down, it was a fire fought for, a flame that burned brighter when power was held to account. Mark's fall wasn't just a personal reckoning. It was a warning to those who'd abused their authority, a reminder that the consequences of such betrayal could topple even the most fortified walls. For Lucy and the others, it was a beginning to spark that lit the way toward a system rebuilt on integrity, not impunity. On a quiet suburban road bathed in the soft glow of dusk, a sleek black SUV hummed along, its polished surface reflecting the last streaks of daylight. Inside, Cassandra Harris, a 40-year-old black woman with a presence that radiated confidence and authority, gripped the steering wheel with steady hands. Her sharp eyes, framed by the faintest lines of exhaustion, flickered to the rearview mirror. She had just wrapped up a grueling day at the FBI office in Washington, D.C., where she reigned as director of the most formidable figures in American law enforcement. Yet, in this fleeting moment, all she craved was the comfort of home, a warm meal, the rustle of pages from her favorite novel, and a chance to let the weight of her title slip away. The headlights of sparse traffic danced in her mirror, a quiet rhythm disrupted by the sudden flare of red and blue lights. A police cruiser's siren wailed behind her, slicing through the stillness and yanking her back from her reverie. Cassandra's brow furrowed, a ripple of confusion tightening her chest. She hadn't sped, hadn't swerved, hadn't given any cause for this interruption. Her mind raced through the possibilities: routine patrol, a mistake still. She eased the SUV to the shoulder, the gravel crunching beneath her tires like a reluctant sigh. She rolled down her window, the cool evening air brushing her skin, and waited. Her posture straight, her breathing measured. From the cruiser emerged Officer Mark Benson, a tall white man in his 30s, his face etched with a scowl that seemed carved into his features. His uniform was crisp, his badge glinting under the streetlights, but his demeanor carried an edge of disdain as he approached. He stopped at her door, leaning down with a brusqueness that bordered on hostility, his pale eyes scanning her and the luxurious vehicle with thinly veiled suspicion. "You were stopped for security reasons," Mark declared, his voice flat and icy, devoid of courtesy or explanation. Cassandra tilted her head slightly, a faint smile tugging at her lips, net one of warmth, but of quiet irritation she refused to let spill over. "Security?" she replied, her tone calm yet probing. "Is there an issue with me or my car?" Mark's expression didn't soften. "Show me your vehicle registration and license," he snapped, brushing past her question as if it were irrelevant. Cassandra's fingers hesitated for a heartbeat, the urge to challenge him flaring within her, but she swallowed it down, opting for composure over confrontation. With deliberate grace, she opened the glove compartment, retrieved the requested documents, and handed them over, her movements smooth but her mind churning. Mark snatched the papers, giving them a cursory glance before retreating to his cruiser. Alone again, Cassandra leaned back in her seat, the hum of the engine a soft undercurrent to her racing thoughts. She was no stranger to this being sized up, dismissed, or targeted because of her skin. Even as FBI director, a title that commanded respect in the highest echelons of power, she couldn't escape the sting of prejudice. It wasn't new, but it never dulled. She clenched her jaw, her fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel as she wrestled with the familiar ache of injustice. Mark returned minutes later, his boots crunching against the gravel, his face a mask of cold authority. "I need your ID," he demanded, his voice sharper now, edged with impatience. Cassandra raised an eyebrow, her calm facade unshaken. "My registration and license are in order," she said evenly. "I've done nothing to warrant further identification." "Can you explain why you're asking?" Mark folded his arms, a smirk curling his lips as he loomed over her window. "You've got a suspicious attitude," he retorted, his gaze flicking to her tailored jacket, simple yet refined. A subtle marker of her status he seemed determined to ignore. "No one like you drives a car like this unless something's off." Her pulse quickened, a hot flare of anger surging through her veins, but she held it in check. "Suspicious attitude." The words echoed in her mind, a thinly veiled jab she'd heard too many times before. "What exactly are you basing that on?" She pressed, her voice steady but laced with steel. Mark shrugged, dismissive. "Nothing special, but I'm in charge here. If you don't show ID, I can haul you to the station." Cassandra's grip tightened on the wheel, her knuckles whitening as she fought to keep her tone level. "Sir, your request is illegal. I've provided everything required by law. Unless you have a valid reason, I won't comply." His eyes flashed with fury, the smirk vanishing as he leaned closer. "Don't tell me how to do my job, sister." He spat, the word dripping with venom. "People like you don't get to challenge police authority." The insult struck like a blade, cutting deep into wounds she'd carried for years. Her breath caught, a storm of emotions, rage, sorrow, defiance swirling in her chest. But she met his glare head-on, unflinching. "I'm not challenging your authority," she said, her voice a quiet thunder. "I'm asking you to use it lawfully. Abusing it will have consequences." Mark sneered, stepping back but bristling with defiance. "Consequences? Who do you think you are to threaten me? You don't know how things work." His hand hovered near his gun belt, a silent boast of power, his breathing heavy with frustration. Cassandra's heart pounded, but she refused to waver. "I know the law better than most." "Officer Benson," she replied, her words deliberate and unshakable. "And I know you're crossing a line." He took another step back, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with hostility. For a man like him, being corrected desperately by a black woman was an affront he couldn't stomach. "If you don't cooperate," he growled, "I'll arrest you right now." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating, but Cassandra drew a slow breath, anchoring herself in the clarity of her resolve. She knew this dance power wielded as a weapon, justice twisted into a tool of oppression. "You have no legal grounds to arrest me," she said, her voice firm and unshaken. "I suggest you think carefully before this goes too far." Mark's face twisted, a volatile mix of anger and wounded pride. He leaned in again, his breath hot against the cool night air. "You think you can lecture me? I don't have time to argue with you. Show me your ID, or I'll make you regret it." His fingers twitched near his holster, a gesture meant to intimidate, but Cassandra remained still, her gaze piercing through his bravado. "This isn't about paperwork," she said softly, almost to herself, though her words carried weight. "This is about power, woe has it, and who dares to question it." Mark's lip curled, his patience fraying. "I'm the cop here. You're just a driver. Comply, or I'll use force." The threat was real, and for a fleeting moment, fear flickered in her chest, not for herself, but for what this encounter represented. She'd seen it before, countless times, in the stories of others, authority unchecked, consequences ignored. But she wasn't just anyone. She was Cassandra Harris, a woman who'd risen through a system stacked against her, who'd faced down threats far greater than this petty tyrant on a lonely road. "Officer Benson," she said, her voice rising with quiet authority, "if you persist, you're the one who'll be in danger, not me." His eyes widened, a flicker of uncertainty breaking through his rage. "Danger?" he scoffed, though his bravado wavered. "You're threatening me now." She shook her head, her expression resolute. "I'm warning you. There's a line between duty and abuse. You've crossed it." For a moment, silence stretched between them, the tension crackling like static. Mark stepped back, his defiance still smoldering, but something in her unwavering calm seemed to unsettle him. He wasn't used to this, to someone who knew their rights, who stood firm without fear. Back at the precinct, the air was thick with the hum of change. Other victims of Mark's overreach, once silenced by fear, began to whisper their stories. The police department, long a fortress of unspoken codes, felt the tremor of reform. New training programs rolled out, their lessons sharp with the promise of accountability, while an independent oversight committee took shape, a beacon for those who'd been wronged. Some officers resisted, clinging to old ways, but others, like Ryan, saw the cracks in the system for what they were. In a quiet corner of the precinct, Ryan approached Ethan, his voice low but earnest. Mark was loud. Sure, but he was just a piece of something bigger. If we want real change, it's on us to call it out, no excuses. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. No more turning a blind eye. Meanwhile, Lucy, another soul caught in this web of reckoning, trudged home after a day of relentless meetings. Her shoulders sagged, her body weary, but her spirit burned bright. Alexander greeted her at the door, his eyes warm with pride. "You're shaking things up out there," he said, pressing a steaming mug of tea into her hands. "People are starting to hear you." Lucy sank into the couch, the cushions swallowing her exhaustion as she cradled the mug. "It's not just me," she murmured, her gaze drifting to the city lights twinkling beyond the window. "It's Clara, Caroline, Marina, Ethan, even Janet Way all carried this forward." Alexander settled beside her, his presence a steady comfort. "And what's next?" he asked. She stared into the distance, resolve hardening in her chest. "We keep pushing. This isn't over." Cassandra's stand that night wasn't just a victory over one rogue officer, it was a spark. Lucy's fight, woven with the courage of her allies, fanned that spark into a flame, igniting a broader reckoning about power and its misuse. Their story is Cassandra's quiet defiance, Lucy's relentless drive, the bravery of those who refused to stay silent become a testament to justice's slow, stubborn march. Mark Benson, with his sneers and threats, was a symptom of a deeper rot, one that thrived in shadows until voices like theirs dragged it into the light. And in that light, a lesson emerged. Power, when wielded without restraint, invites its own downfall. True change, though, begins with one voice and grows when others rise to join it. The air was thick with tension as Cassandra Harris sat behind the wheel of her car, her fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. Though her face remained a mask of unshakable calm, she stared straight ahead, her dark eyes glinting with a quiet fury that simmered just beneath the surface. Across from her stood Officer Mark Benson, his broad frame towering over the vehicle, his knuckles rapping sharply against the roof of her car in a rhythm that betrayed his growing irritation. "You're abusing your power, Officer Benson," she said, her voice steady and measured, carrying an authority that cut through the night like a blade. "I'm warning you, stop this now, or you'll face the consequences of your actions." Her words didn't soothe Mark, they ignited him, his face twisted into a snarl, his cheeks flushing red as anger surged through him like wildfire. He slammed his fist down harder on the car's roof, the dull thud echoing in the stillness of the deserted road. "Do you even know who you're talking to?" he bellowed, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I'm a cop. I've got every right to demand papers from anyone I damn well please. And I don't need some nobody telling me how to do my job." His chest heaved as he glared at her, daring her to push him further. Cassandra's heart pounded in her chest, not out of fear, but from a deep, bitter indignation that clawed at her insides. The injustice of it all, blatant arrogance, the unchecked entitlementing her like a slap across the face. She could feel the heat rising in her throat, the urge to lash out bubbling up, but she swallowed it down. She knew better than to let her emotions take the reins. Reacting impulsively would only hand him the victory he craved. Instead, she straightened her spine, her resolve hardening like steel. "Then I suggest you call your superiors," she said, her tone dropping to a low, unwavering register that carried the weight of a command. "We'll handle this with someone higher up." Mark's response was a laugh, a harsh, grating sound that scraped against the quiet night air. It wasn't born of amusement but of scorn, a mocking bark that made his disdain for her crystal clear. "Call a superior. Who do you think you are, lady? I don't need to call anyone. I've got this under control." His lips curled into a sneer as he leaned closer, his shadow falling over her through the open window. Cassandra didn't flinch. She held his gaze, her eyes sharp and unyielding, a silent challenge woven into every line of her expression. "You'll regret that choice," she said softly, her words laced with a quiet menace that seemed to catch him off guard. For a fleeting moment, something flickered in his ice and certainty. Perhaps, but it was quickly swallowed by a wave of fury. His hand shot to his holster, yanking his gun free with a jerky motion, and he leveled it at her. "Get out of the car," he barked, his voice cracking with the strain of his rage. "Hands on your head, you don't get to disobey me." The sight of the barrel staring her down sent a chill racing through her veins. But Cassandra refused to let it show. Her pulse thundered in her ears, yet her movements were deliberate, almost serene. As she pushed the car door open and stepped onto the asphalt, in her left hand, she clutched her phone, its sleek surface cool against her palm, a lifeline she intended to use. She stood tall, her posture radiating defiance, and met his wild gaze with a calmness that seemed to unnerve him. "Do you really want to go down this road, Officer Benson?" she asked, her voice smooth but edged with a daring undertone. "Are you sure this won't destroy everything you've built?" Mark didn't answer right away. His hand trembled faintly, the gun wavering in his grip, though his eyes still blazed with a volatile mix of anger and pride. He was a man teetering on the edge, torn between the power he wielded and the creeping realization that he might have misjudged his opponent. Cassandra, sensing his hesitation, moved with calculated precision. Her thumb brushed over her phone's screen, pressing the speed dial button with a subtle flick. The call connected instantly, and she spoke into the receiver with crisp clarity. "This is Cassandra Harris. I'm being detained by an abusive police officer. I need the sheriff here now." Mark's brows furrowed, confusion etching deep lines into his forehead. "Who the hell are you calling?" he snapped, his voice tinged with a nervousness he couldn't quite mask. "You think you can just wriggle out of this?" She ignored him, her focus unwavering as she relayed her exact location. To the person on the other end, a stretch of lonely road flanked by shadowed trees and the faint hum of distant traffic. "Thank you. I'll be waiting," she concluded, ending the call with a decisive tap. Then she turned her gaze back to Mark, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. "The sheriff's on his way," she said coolly. "If I were you, I'd think very hard about what you'd do next." For a few agonizing seconds, Mark stood frozen, the gun still aimed at her chest. The bravado that had fueled him moments ago drained from his face, replaced by a flicker of doubt. Then something darker, fear, perhaps. His jaw tightened, his teeth grinding audibly as he struggled to regain control. "What game are you playing?" he growled, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction, quivering at the edges like a storm about to break. Cassandra's smile widened ever so slightly, though it held no warmth. "This isn't a game, Officer Benson. This is real, and you're about to face the fallout of your choices." She stood motionless, her hands relaxed at her sides, exuding a quiet confidence that seemed to shrink him in her presence. Mark said nothing more, his breaths coming in shallow bursts, his mind clearly racing to catch up with the shift in power unfolding before him. In the distance, a faint glow pierced the darkness and blue lights slicing through the night like a beacon. The sheriff's car rolled into view, its tires crunching over loose gravel as it came to a stop a few yards away. The door swung open, and out stepped Sheriff David Morales, a man whose weathered face and stern demeanor spoke of decades spent upholding the law. His salt and pepper hair caught the gleam of the flashing lights, and his strides were quick and purposeful as he approached the scene. His sharp eyes took in everything at once, Cassandra standing tall and unflinching, Mark with his gun still drawn, the air thick with unspoken conflict. Displeasure etched itself into the deep lines of his brow. "Benson," Morale's voice boomed, reverberating through the tense silence. "Lower that weapon right now. What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Mark whirled around, his face paling as recognition dawned. The gun dropped to his side almost instinctively, though his hands shook as he fumbled for an explanation. "Sir, I was just doing my job," he stammered, his bravado crumbling under Morale's piercing stare. This woman refused to show ID. She was uncooperative. Cassandra stepped forward, her presence commanding attention without effort. "Chief Morales, thank you for arriving so quickly," she said, her tone firm yet laced with a quiet gratitude. "We need to have a serious discussion about this officer's conduct." Morales turned to her, his gaze narrowing as he studied her face. Then his eyes widened, a spark of realization igniting within them. "Director Harris?" he asked, his voice dropping to a hushed, almost reverent tone. Mark's head snapped toward her, his mouth falling open in stunned disbelief. "Director Harris? You mean?" His words faltered, his bravado evaporating as the weight of his mistake crashed down on him. Cassandra nodded, her gaze never leaving Mark's. "Yes, I'm Cassandra Harris, Director of the FBI, and this officer abused his authority, insulted me with racial slurs, and threatened me with a firearm without cause." Her voice was steady, each word a hammer striking nails into the coffin of Mark's defense. His face drained of color, sweat beading along his hairline as panic seized him. "You didn't know," he stuttered, his eyes darting between her and Morales like a trapped animal. "I was just—" Morales cut him off, his jaw clenching as fury darkened his features. "Benson, what have you done?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you realize your actions don't just break protocol, they could land you in a courtroom facing charges?" Mark shrank under the weight of his superior's words, his shoulders slumping as he tried to muster a defense. "Sir, I didn't know who she was. I was following procedure." "Procedure?" Cassandra interjected, her eyebrow arching in disbelief. "I presented my vehicle documents. You had no legal grounds to demand more, yet you escalated insulting me, threatening me with a gun. Is that your idea of procedure?" Her words were sharp, slicing through his excuses with surgical precision. Mark bowed his head, unable to meet her gaze, his hands trembling at his sides. Morales exhaled heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose as he fought to rein in his anger. "Benson, get back to the station," he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. "File a full report of this incident, every detail. I'll deal with you later." Mark hesitated, his feet rooted to the spot as if he could delay the inevitable. But Morales' glare bore into him, and with a reluctant nod, he trudged back to his patrol car, the engine roaring to life as he sped off into the night. Morales turned to Cassandra, his expression softening into something apologetic, almost pained. "Director Harris, I'm deeply sorry for what happened here," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "This kind of behavior is unacceptable from anyone in my department. I'll personally see to it that this is investigated thoroughly and justice is served." Cassandra nodded, though her eyes remained cool and distant, as if she were still processing the weight of the encounter. "Thank you, Chief Morales," she replied. "I trust you'll do what's right not just for me, but for everyone who's suffered at the hands of officers like him." Her words carried a deeper meaning, a call to action that hung heavy in the air. Morales' face flushed with a mix of shame and resolve. "Do you want to file a formal complaint?" he asked. "Absolutely," she said without hesitation. "But first, I want every detail of Officer Benson's actions documented. This isn't just about one man, it's about a system that lets power corrupt those who wield it." Morales dipped his head in agreement, a silent promise etched into his posture. "I'll oversee this myself," he assured her. "You'll be updated on every step." Cassandra took a slow, steadying breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly as the adrenaline began to ebb. The confrontation was over, but she knew it was only the beginning of a larger fight. As FBI director, her duty extended far beyond this moment. She was a guardian of justice, tasked with dismantling the rot of discrimination and abuse that festered within the system. "Thank you, Morales," she said, her voice softening but still firm. "I hope this is the start of something better." Morales met her gaze, his eyes alight with determination. "I'll do everything in my power to make that happen, Director Harris." She held his look for a long moment, searching for sincerity, then gave a slight nod and returned to her car. Sliding into the driver's seat, she didn't start the engine right away. Instead, she sat there, staring out at the road stretching into the darkness, her mind swirling with thoughts of what had transpired and what lay ahead. When she finally turned the key, the hum of the engine filled the silence, and as her taillights faded into the night, her resolve burned brighter than ever. In the days that followed, the small town buzzed with chaos. Word of Officer Mark Benson drawing a gun on FBI Director Cassandra Harris spread like wildfire, igniting a storm of outrage that swept through the sheriff's office and beyond. Major news outlets seized the story, their headlines screaming of corruption and abuse, while the public demanded answers. For Cassandra, it was a stark reminder of the stakes she fought, a single incident that laid bare the consequences of unchecked power and the enduring fight for justice that would define her legacy. The air was thick with tension as Sheriff David Morales sat at his cluttered desk, his brow furrowed with determination. Without a moment's hesitation, He set into motion an internal investigation that would ripple far beyond the walls of his precinct. The evidence was already piling up. The body camera footage from Officer Mark Benson's patrol car, the crackling audio from his body-worn microphone, each frame and soundbite a damning testament to a man unraveling under the weight of his own unchecked authority. The recordings painted a vivid picture, one that Morales could hardly bear to watch. Benson's voice, dripping with venom, cut through the static. "Who do you think you are to not follow the rules? You should know this isn't your neighborhood." The words that followed were a barrage of insults so vile they seemed to hang in the air, stirring a deep, righteous anger in anyone who heard them. This wasn't just a lapse in judgment, it was a glaring spotlight on the rot of power abused, a stain on the badge Benson wore. The footage didn't lie, and it didn't spare Benson's dignity, his contemptuous sneer. The way his eyes narrowed as he spat out his hateful tirade was all there, captured in stark clarity. For Morales, a man who'd spent decades upholding the law with a quiet, steady hand, the betrayal stung deeply. He felt the weight of every citizen's gaze, their trust in his department fraying with each replay of that video. The public's reaction was swift and unrelenting. Celebrities took to their platforms, their voices amplified by millions of followers. Human rights activists marched with signs held high, their chants echoing through city streets, and ordinary people, neighbors, parents, workers shared their outrage in whispered conversations and furious social media posts. They all demanded one thing: justice, not just for the man Benson had targeted, but for a system that had allowed such a moment to fester. To quell the growing storm, Morales stood before a sea of flashing cameras at a press conference, his broad shoulders squared, but his eyes heavy with regret. The room buzzed with anticipation as he cleared his throat, his deep voice cutting through the murmur. "We deeply regret what happened," he began, his tone raw with sincerity. "Officer Mark Benson's behavior was unacceptable. It doesn't reflect who we are as a department, or the values we strive to uphold. I promise you, we're committed to handling this with transparency and fairness. We'll take every step necessary to restore trust in this community." The words felt like a vow, one he knew he couldn't break. Behind him stood Cassandra, a woman whose calm demeanor masked a fire that had been stoked by years of fighting for what was right. She stepped forward, her presence commanding the room without effort. Her voice was steady, deliberate, as she gripped the podium. "I'm not here for personal justice," she said, her dark eyes scanning the crowd. "I'm here to demand a system where no one has to fear those sworn to protect them. This isn't just one person's burden, it's a responsibility we all share, from the top down." The auditorium erupted in applause, a wave of sound that seemed to lift her words higher, embedding them in the hearts of everyone listening. The investigation stretched over a grueling week, each day peeling back more layers of Benson's actions. The disciplinary board convened in a dimly lit room, their faces etched with the gravity of their task. When the final decision came, Benson's termination, it landed like a thunderclap. The announcement was swift, accompanied by a statement that barred him from ever wearing a badge again anywhere. The once brash officer, who'd strutted through life with an air of untouchability, now stood stripped of his armor. In a brief, halting interview with a local reporter, he shuffled his feet, his eyes darting to the ground. "I messed up," he muttered, his voice a shadow of its former arrogance. "I didn't think it'd blow up like this. I'm sorry, me prejudice got the better of me." But the apology, limp and late, couldn't undo the wreckage of his career. It was a hollow echo against the lives he'd scarred, a reminder that consequences don't bend for remorse. But this wasn't the end, it was a beginning. The fallout from Benson's actions lit a fuse under Morales, who felt the heat of public scrutiny, and Cassandra's unwavering resolve bearing down on him. He pushed through reforms with a fervor he hadn't known he possessed: mandatory anti-racism training for every officer, courses on diversity and equity that dug deep into the roots of bias, cameras installed on every patrol vehicle and clipped to every uniform, recording every interaction as a safeguard against secrecy, and a hotline, a lifeline for citizens to report abuses without trembling at the thought of retaliation. Cassandra, now the FBI director, watched from her office in Washington, her mind already spinning with plans to carry this model nationwide. At a federal meeting, her voice rang with conviction. We need a system that doesn't flinch at race or status, a system built on fairness, not fear. For her, this wasn't a personal victory. It was a crack in the foundation of a flawed society, a chance to rebuild something stronger. Meanwhile, on a sun-drenched afternoon, Jason Williams, a 45-year-old federal prosecutor with a reputation as unyielding as steel, drove his sleek sports car toward the mayor's daughter's wedding. His suit was pressed, his gift wrapped with care, and his mind light with the promise of celebration. The summer breeze whipped through the open window as he cruised down a quiet stretch of road, the hum of the engine a soothing companion. He was a man who'd faced down mob bosses and corrupt officials without blinking. Today was supposed to be a reprieve, a rare moment of joy. But then, red lights flared in his rearview mirror, sharp and insistent. He eased the car to the shoulder, his brow creasing in mild confusion. He hadn't been speeding. He was certain of it. A lawman through and through, Jason lived by the rules he enforced. The officer who stepped out of the patrol car was Mark Benson, though Jason didn't know his name yet. Dressed in a crisp uniform, gloves tight over his knuckles, Benson approached with a stride that oozed authority. His eyes, shadowed beneath his helmet, glinted with something rougher than professionalism. "Hello, sir," he said, but the greeting carried no warmth. It was a challenge wrapped in formality. "You were speeding. I'm writing you up, and you'll need to pay the fine." Jason blinked, his calm unshaken, but his curiosity piqued. "I don't believe I was speeding," he replied evenly, his voice smooth as polished wood. "If you've got proof, I'd like to see it." Benson's gaze hardened, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "We've got a speedometer right here," he said, tapping his equipment with mock casualness. "That's all the proof I need. You broke the law. End of story." Jason's frown deepened, but he held his ground. "You're saying I violated the law, but I see no evidence. Without that, I'm not obligated to pay anything." Benson's posture stiffened, his tone sharpening like a blade. "You don't get to refuse me," he snapped, leaning closer. "I'm in charge here. Pay the fine." Now, the air between them crackled with defiance. Jason's pulse quickened, not from fear but from a growing indignation. "This is an abuse of power," he said, his words measured but firm. "You can't demand compliance without cause. Keep this up, and I'll report you." Benson's face twisted, his patience snapping like a brittle twig. "What do you know about power?" he sneered, his voice low and venomous. "I'm the one calling the shots here, not you." The exchange escalated, and Benson's restraint crumbled entirely. His words turned vicious, laced with racial slurs that hit Jason like a physical blow. The hate in the officer's eyes wasn't just personal. It was a deep, festering ugliness that threatened to swallow anyone in its path. Jason's anger flared, but he clung to his composure, years of courtroom battles steadying his resolve. "I don't care who you think I am," he said, his voice rising just enough to cut through Benson's tirade. "What I care about is that you don't get to treat me or anyone like this." But Benson was beyond reason, his fury spiraling into a storm of insults that echoed down the empty road. Unbeknownst to Benson, he'd picked the wrong man to bully. Jason wasn't just a wedding guest, he was a titan in the legal world, a man with the clout to turn this roadside stop into a reckoning. As Benson raged, Jason's mind shifted from shock to strategy, already mapping out the steps he'd take to ensure this moment didn't fade into silence. The encounter wasn't just a personal affront. It was a glaring lesson in the fragility of justice when power goes unchecked. For Jason, for Cassandra, for Morales, it was a call to action, a reminder that the law's strength lies not in its enforcers, but in those brave enough to hold them accountable. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the road, the wheels of change began to turn, propelled by the courage of those who refused to bow to hate. The sting of those words cut deeper than Jason could have anticipated, a sharp jab at his pride that reverberated through his chest like a thunderclap. Someone like Jason had no right to demand justice. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and bitter, threatening to unravel the fragile restraint he'd spent a lifetime cultivating. His pulse quickened, a hot surge of indignation rising in his throat, but he clenched his fists and forced it back down. Anger was an old companion, one he'd wrestled with since childhood. forged in the crucible of racism that had shadowed his every step. He knew its seductive pull, how it could drag him into chaos, into a fight he couldn't win with fists or fury. No, he wouldn't let it take the wheel, not now. Not ever. Jason drew in a long, deliberate breath, the cool air slicing through the heat of his emotions. His eyes fluttered shut for a fleeting moment, long enough to imagine the storm within him settling, the waves of rage flattening into a still, glassy sea. When he opened them again, he fixed his gaze on the police officer standing before him, a man whose uniform gleamed with authority, but whose actions reeked of something far uglier. Jason's voice emerged like tempered steel, cold, unshakable, cutting through the tension. "You're abusing your power," he said, each syllable deliberate, weighted with the certainty of a man who'd seen the law twisted too many times. "Your actions carry consequences once, and I'll make damn sure you face them." The officer's face twisted, a flicker of disdain crossing his features, as though Jason's words were nothing more than an annoyance to swat away. He didn't bother with a replino attempt to justify, no hint of remorse. Instead, his anger flared brighter, a wildfire sparked by defiance he couldn't tolerate. With a jerk of his arm, he yanked his pistol from its holster, the metal glinting ominously in the fading daylight as he leveled it at Jason's chest. "Get out of the car," he barked, his tone jagged with impatience, the kind of roughness that suggested he'd grown to comfortable barking orders at people who couldn't fight back. Jason's heart thudded against his ribs, a steady drumbeat beneath his calm exterior. He could feel the situation spiraling, teetering on the edge of something irreversible. But he refused to let fear or the officer's aggression dictate his next move. Conflict wasn't the answer, it never had been. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for the door handle, his movements measured as if to prove he wasn't a threat. The door creaked open, and he stepped out onto the asphalt, the cool evening air brushing against his face. His legs felt steady beneath him, though his mind raced with the weight of what was unfolding. "Kneel," the officer shouted, his voice cracking with menace, the gun trembling slightly in his grip. It was a command dripping with dominance, an attempt to strip Jason of his dignity and force him into submission. Around them, the street was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic and the faint rustle of leaves skittering across the pavimenta. Stark contrast to the storm brewing between the two men. Jason straightened his spine, his broad shoulders squared, and met the officer's glare with a look of quiet defiance. He wouldn't kneel. Not now, not ever. To bend would be to hand this man a victory he didn't deserve, to validate a power he wielded without reason or restraint. "I'm not kneeling," Jason said, his voice a low, steady current cutting through the officer's bluster. "I've done nothing wrong, and I won't let you trample over me like this." He stood tall, a federal prosecutor who'd faced down threats in courtrooms and back alleys alike, a man who'd spent years building a life that racism couldn't dismantle. The officer's eyes narrowed, his fury boiling over into something feral. "Do you hear me?" he roared, stepping closer, the barrel of the gun inching toward Jason's face. "I order you to kneel, or I'll deal with you right here." His face was a mask of violence, flushed red, veins bulging at his temples as spittle flew from his lips. Jason didn't flinch. To him, this wasn't just a standoff with one reckless cop, it was a battle for something bigger, something foundational. Justice wasn't a word he threw around lightly. It was the bedrock of his career, the compass that had guided him through every trial, every injustice he'd witnessed or endured. He couldn't let this officer, a man sworn to uphold the law, shatter it with impunity. The danger was real, palpable, a tight coil in his gut warning him that one wrong move could end it all. Yet he stood firm, his resolve a shield against the chaos threatening to erupt. The air grew thick, suffocating, as the officer growled again, his patience fraying to threads. But Jason wasn't about to play the submissive role this man demanded. He knew capitulation wouldn't stop the abuse, it would only embolden it. Instead, he shifted his strategy, his mind racing for a way to turn the tide. With a calmness that belied the storm inside him, he slipped his hand into his pocket, fingers brushing against the cool surface of his phone. "I'm calling the mayor," he said flatly, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world, a routine task rather than a lifeline. The officer froze, a jolt of shock rippling through him. "Well, what are you doing?" he demanded. His voice tinged with unease, the bravado slipping for the first time. Jason didn't respond, his focus locked on the phone as he pulled it free. But in the officer's eyes, the movement registered as something else, something threatening. Panic seized the man, his hands trembling as his imagination leapt to the worst conclusion. "Don't do anything," he shouted, his voice shrill with desperation. Before Jason could blink, the crack of a gunshot split the air, a deafening roar that echoed off the surrounding buildings. Pain exploded in Jason's right leg, a searing agony that ripped through muscle and bone. Buckling his knees beneath him, he hit the ground hard, asphalt biting into his palms as blood began to pool beneath him, staining his polished leather shoe a dark, glistening red. The world tilted, his vision swimming, but his mind clung to clarity with a ferocity that surprised even him. He wouldn't let this be the end, not of his fight, not of his principles. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he pressed his fingers to the phone, each tap a small act of defiance. Blood smeared the screen, but he didn't stop. One more press, and help would come. The officer stood over him, his bravado replaced by a dawning horror. "To thought you were pulling a gun," he stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. His eyes wide with the realization of what he'd done. Jason ignored him, his focus singular as the call connected. "Mayor," he said, his voice steady despite the fire in his leg, "I need help now. The police attacked me in the leg without cause. They're abusing their power. I'm okay, but you need to get here fast." On the other end, the mayor's voice shifted from its usual warmth to a taut, urgent edge. "Jason, are you all right? Hold on, I'm coming. We'll sort this out." The line stayed open, a lifeline tethering Jason to the promise of accountability as he lay bleeding on the cold ground. The officer hovered nearby, his gun still in hand, but his confidence shattered, replaced by a frantic energy that bordered on hysteria. He hadn't expected this at the call, not the calm resolve of the man he'd just shot. He didn't know who Jason was, didn't grasp the weight of the connections he wielded or the influence he carried. Minutes stretched into eternity, the pain in Jason's leg pulsing with every heartbeat, yet he refused to let it break him. Then the distant wail of sirens pierced the night, growing louder as patrol cars screeched to a halt around them. The sheriff leapt out first, his weathered face tightening with fury as he took in the Jason on the ground, blood pooling. The officer standing dumbstruck with a smoking gun. The mayor followed, stepping from his car with a stride that radiated authority, his usually composed demeanor replaced by a simmering rage. "What the hell are you doing?" he bellowed, his voice a thunderous rebuke as he zeroed in on the officer. "Are you trying to kill someone?" The officer's mouth opened, but no words came. His world was unraveling, thread by thread, and he could feel it. The police chief, a burly man with a no-nonsense air, stormed forward, his eyes blazing. "Who does he think he is?" he snapped, gesturing at Jason. "That's a federal prosecutor, me friend. What kind of reckless idiot shoots a man like him?" The truth landed like a sledgehammer, and the officer's bravado crumbled entirely, leaving him a hollow shell of the man who'd pulled the trigger. Suspension was immediate. The chief's orders barked with a sharpness that left no room for debate. But for Jason, this wasn't just about one man's punishment, it was about the rot that let him think he could act this way. Racism, power unchecked, justice trampled underfoot fought those demons his whole life. And he wouldn't stop now. As the paramedics arrived, their hands swift and gentle as they tended to his wound, Jason's gaze remained steady, locked on the mayor. "This can't end here," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a vow. "I want a full investigation. This officer's actions can't be swept aside. There have to be consequences." The mayor nodded, his jaw tight. "You're right. We won't let this stand. Chief, you know what to do, handle it by the book." The sheriff, his stern face etched with determination, signaled his team to begin the process. While the ambulance crew lifted Jason onto a stretcher, even in pain, he exuded a quiet strength, a refusal to let this moment define him as a victim. The officer, meanwhile, stood frozen, guilt and dread washing over him in waves. The sight of Jason calm, resolute, unbroken made his stomach churn with the weight of his own failure. Later, in the mayor's office, the reckoning continued. The officer sat slumped in a chair, his badge stripped, his hands trembling as the mayor tore into him. "You think a little power gives you the right to play God?" the mayor demanded, his voice low and cutting. "You didn't just hurt your son, you shattered the trust people have in us. In this uniform. Do you even understand what you've done?" The officer's head bowed. His muttered excuses. "I thought he was a criminal," drowned out by the mayor's fury. "You thought? You didn't think at all." For Jason, lying in a hospital bed with his leg bandaged, the fight wasn't over. The pain was a dull roar now, but his mind was clear. Justice wasn't just a concept, it was a promise, one he'd keep no matter the cost. And for the officer, the consequences were only beginning, a stark reminder that power, when abused, could topple even those who thought themselves untouchable. The air hung heavy with tension that day, thick as the dust swirling in the late afternoon sun. A police officer, his badge gleaming like a false promise, stood towering over Jason, a man whose only crime was existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The officer's hand rested on his holster, his fingers twitching with an itch for control, his voice dripping with venom as he spat words laced with hate. His eyes, cold and unyielding, betrayed a man who believed himself above reproach, a self-appointed arbiter of fate. He didn't just wield a gun that day, he wielded power, raw and unchecked, pressing it down on the innocent like a boot on a throat. Jason, trembling yet defiant, felt the sting of humiliation burn through him, a cocktail of fear and rage churning in his chest as the officer's racist taunts echoed in the empty street. "Who do you think you are?" Jason's voice had quavered, barely audible over the pounding of his own heart, but the question lingered, a quiet accusation that would soon grow into a deafening roar. The officer smirked, oblivious to the storm he'd unleashed, his arrogance blinding him to the eyes watching from cracked windows and shadowed corners. He'd drawn his weapon without cause, a reckless flourish of authority, the barrel glinting in the fading light as if to mock the very idea of justice. To him, it was just another day, another chance to flex his dominance. But to Jason, it was a violation that cut deeper than any bullet, a wound to his dignity, his humanity, left raw and bleeding. Word of the incident spread like wildfire, igniting outrage that crackled through the community. The police chief, a man weathered by years of balancing order and chaos, sat behind his desk, his brow furrowed as he watched the grainy footage from Jason's car. His jaw tightened with every frame, the officer's actions unfolding like a slow-motion tragedy. "I cannot tolerate this," he muttered, his voice low but resolute, the weight of his position pressing down on him. He wasn't just angry, was ashamed. Ashamed that one of his own had tarnished the shield they all swore to uphold. "He will face the law," he declared, slamming a fist on the desk, the sound reverberating through the room like a gavel strike. For him, this wasn't just about one man's misdeeds, it was about the soul of the force he'd spent decades building. The officer, summoned to a meeting the next day, slouched in a chair, his uniform suddenly feeling too tight, too heavy. He couldn't meet the piercing gazes of his accusers, their eyes boring into him like drills seeking truth. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his hands fidgeting in his lap as the reality sank in. He'd gone too far. The room buzzed with whispers, a chorus of condemnation he couldn't escape. He'd always thought himself untouchable, a king in a kingdom of his own making. But now the walls were closing in, and no badge, no bravado, could shield him from the reckoning. Deep down, beneath the layers of pride and denial, a flicker of dread sparked. He knew he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. An investigation launched with the speed of lightning, cutting through the haze of excuses and half-truths. Detectives pored over every detail, their faces grim as they sifted through evidence, like archaeologists unearthing a buried sin. Jason's dashcam footage became the centerpiece, a silent witness that spoke louder than any testimony. There it was, in stark black and white, the officer's gun drawn without provocation, his words sharp with racial venom, his posture radiating menace. Each frame was a nail in the coffin of his career, a testament to his abuse of power. The investigators didn't stop there. They dug into his past, unearthing a pattern of aggression and prejudice that stretched back years. A trail of complaints swept under the rug until now. Just 24 hours later, the verdict crashed down like thunder. The officer sat in a sterile room, his head bowed as officials read the findings aloud. His violent outburst was only the beginning. His racism, blatant and unapologetic, had poisoned every interaction with Jason. The words fired and charged hit him like blows, each syllable stripping away the identity he'd clung to. Abuse of power, assault on the innocent, racial discrimination charges piled up, a towering indictment of his reign of terror. The court loomed next, a judge's stern face delivering the final blow, 11 years behind bars. It was a sentence heavy with intent, a blazing warning to anyone who dared wield authority without respect for justice. As the gavel fell, the officer's shoulders slumped, his kingdom reduced to ashes, his fate a lesson etched in stone. But the ripples of his actions spread far beyond the courtroom. Jason felt them every day, a quiet ache in his bones as he sat in his office, the phone pressed to his ear. On the other end, the mayor's voice crackled with determination, outlining plans to ensure this never happened again. Jason nodded, his fingers tracing the scar on his legal lingering reminder of that day. The physical pain had faded, but the deeper wound, the one carved by betrayal and bigotry, still throbbed. Justice isn't just punishment, he said softly, his voice steady despite the storm within. It's about changing minds, rooting out the rot. The mayor agreed, his tone firm yet weary. Both men acutely aware that this was bigger than one rogue cop. It was a crack in the foundation of their society. The community, too, bore the scars. Neighbors whispered about the incident over fences, their trust in the police fraying like old fabric. Officer Daniels, a young rookie who'd once idolized the disgraced cop, now questioned everything he'd been taught. He'd seen the man as a mentor, tough but fair. No, he saw only a bully, a cautionary tale in a crumpled uniform. Daniels lingered after shifts, replaying the footage in his mind, wrestling with guilt for staying silent too long. The police force's reputation, once a source of pride, now hung in tatters, a shadow over every officer who wore the badge with honor. Days later, City Hall buzzed with purpose. Jason stepped into the meeting room, his limp barely noticeable but his presence commanding. Eyes followed him, some with admiration, others with uneasy as he took his seat. He'd stepped back from the investigation, choosing instead to amplify the voiceless, to turn his pain into a megaphone for change. The mayor and police chief stood at the podium, their voices rising over the hum of the crowd. "We're instituting training," the chief announced, his hands clasped tightly. "Racism, power trips, human rights, we're tackling it all." The mayor nodded, adding, "This isn't just about one man's failure. It's about building a system where no one fears the law meant to protect them." Jason's chest swelled with a fragile pride, a flicker of hope amid the ashes of his ordeal. The reforms took root slowly but surely. Training sessions filled precincts with reluctant officers and eager reformers, debates sparking over coffee-stained tables. Policies tightened, oversight sharpened, each step a brick in a new foundation. Jason watched it unfold, his soul still tender, but his resolve ironclad. A year later, a letter arrived, crisp and official, thanking him for his courage. Another followed from the mayor, personal and heartfelt, crediting him with sparking a revolution in blue. Jason folded them carefully, tucking them away like talismans. The fight wasn't over. Racism and tyranny still lurked in corners, but he'd lit a flame, and it burned brighter with every voice that joined him. In the quiet of his home, Jason gazed out at the city skyline, its lights winking like stars. He thought of the officer, now a ghost in a cell, and of the lessons carved from that day. Justice had prevailed, but its true power lay in what came after: the awakening, the rebuilding, the unrelenting push for a world where no one could ask, "Who do you think you are?" and answer with a gun. For Jason, for Daniels, for the community stitched back together by fragile threads, it was a beginning of how that power, unchecked, would always meet its match in the hands of those who dared to demand better.